Good morning, everybody. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is Jamal Thomas Morning Show. I hope you guys are doing. Sorry. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. I needed my coffee. I apologize for the late delay, but we have a fantastic show for you today. Krainer is going to be here. Dimitri Lascaris, Ted Rall, KJ No. So yes, we have what I tend to call a power show coming up. There is, I want to say slow news, but it's not really slow news. It's more of a continuation of news, in which case puts me in this kind of weird position of having to give an update as opposed to something new that's taking place. After all, news is the lifeblood of this show and of this network. So it is what it is, what it is. Kiev continues to burn. There's that. I didn't make that the lead today because that has been the lead for the last few days, and we don't know how long Kiev is going to burn. Kiev may burn for the next week or so. What we do know is that Russia is no longer effing around. They didn't flip out and use the Rezhniks. They didn't drop a nuke on anybody. It was business as usual, just with an up tempo. We're going to do more business as usual. If we, selling 5 hotcakes, we're going to sell 10. 15, 20 hotcakes this week. Hotcakes in this one is a euphemism for blowing up, effectively, oil platforms, airports, whatever, that is in Kiev. Depots, missile depots, they've destroyed hundreds of weapons, meaning Patriot missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, Scout missiles, etc. Abrams tanks have been effectively blown up. There are videos of thermobaric missiles hitting various locations. Again, blowing up soldiers and, for that matter, blowing up armaments. They've been able to make advances on the battlefield in the Dnipropetrovsk. Nailed that name, I think. They have seemed to change the tempo of this particular special military operation. And at this point, I don't even know if it's even going to remain a special military operation considered the up tempo. Trump does not seem to be coming to Zelensky's aid. In fact, Keith Kellogg and Hegseth, two things. Hegseth came out and effectively said, we are cutting back on the amount of funds for Ukraine. So Ukraine is no longer going to get the amount of revenue that it was getting out of the administration as it was getting out of the Trump administration. Out of the Joe Biden administration. So we are cutting funds to Ukraine. There's that. 2, Kellogg, in an interview, and that was according to Pete Hegseth when it was asked about the defense budget, specifically regards to Ukraine. Keith Kellogg, neocon, the guy with the 25, 80-point plan or whatever the hell number of steps he has in his plan. Hawk, of course, in an interview, came out and said this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what he's saying is Donald Trump seems to be stepping back, letting it play out. I'm gonna let this play out. And I want to talk about that because that is fascinating. Because obviously, that was not the original tenor. That was not the original tenor. If the original tenor was, I'm going to get a deal. Okay, how do you plan to get that deal? Well, I'm the American president. Of course, as the American president, I can get a deal. I just tell people what they're supposed to do. And then when reality hit, how do you do that? Meaning, you tell people what to do when you have leverage to compel their behavior. What happens when you've shot your load and you no longer have that leverage? There are no bullets in that gun. So what do? Escalate the nuclear war? Okay, that seems like a stupid option. So what do? You can pressure. You can, allow the U.S. to go in these campaigns where you have this kind of shadow war under the war that you've effectively operated. But then when Russia's response to that is escalation, a implacable determination for unconditional surrender at that point. You have a conversation with Putin, and Trump comes away. He's very strong about responding. Yeah, you think, which means that Trump realized seemingly in that moment, go with God. And when you finish killing each other, come back and talk to us. Well, again, you leaving this conflict was a threat to Ukraine and not to Russia, they would have preferred you not be involved in it at all. So if you're saying go with God, that is not indicative of anything going on with the Russians. That is applies more to your proxy, more to your horse in this particular race. Of course, that being Zelensky, and Zelensky being the head of Ukraine. This was Kellogg in an interview, and listen to what he says here because I think it's important. Oh, don't start that. Don't start that. Don't start that. I don't know what the hell that is, but don't start it. All right, let's let it play out.
Secretary Rubio made a comment earlier publicly that we're now walking away from walking away. So it's one of those, okay. But in American ice hockey, if two players get into a fight, what they call drop gloves. The referee will wait till one of them goes down to the ice before he intervenes, and then they intervene. And part of that may be saying, okay, when you guys get tired of killing each other, give us a call. You've got my phone number, and we'll come and we'll try to figure it out.
But America wouldn't cut off Ukraine militarily.
I think the pipeline is there to allow stuff to still come in, and the intelligence support is there. I think that would keep going on.
I love the pregnant pause, right? Pregnant pauses are always fantastic because pregnant pauses has stuff. There's something behind that pregnant pause. I think the pipeline is still there. I think the intelligence will still follow. And I wish the reporter would say, why the pregnant pause? Why that pause? What's being hidden in that pregnant pause is what I want to know. Is that answer is, I think the pipeline is still there because now Zelensky can buy weapons, even though these guys are effectively going to default. And they're going to have what, $40 billion next year if they want to continue the war. Hell, $20 billion this year. Are they going to be able to really buy weapons? Meaning, it seems that Trump has come to the conclusion that under the model to which we are operating now, where the Russians know they're in control, Zelensky does not want a deal, does not want to give anything up in the context of a deal, that I can't make any progress on this deal. And anything that I do as an American president only makes me look weak in the process when I can't affect my will. Meaning, if you keep pushing on this and nothing gets done, just like nothing has gotten done for all of these months that you've been in office, even though you say, I'm pushing, I'm trying to get a deal, Okay, that makes you look weak, right? That makes you look like you have no power over the situation. That is an honest and true reflection of things. But as an American president, that is not the position that you want to be in. You want to look strong. You want to look like a hegemon. You want to look like you can tell people what to do. And that is not being in this position where you get nothing accomplished. Zelensky is not going to fall in line. You can walk, but you don't really want to walk, but you can walk. The war would go on for a few months, but you can walk. You don't want to do that. You want to get a deal. And you can't do anything to the Russians. Your power is with your proxy. The problem is that Europe has decided we are going to continue this and we're going to stick our gum in the works and do everything in our power to keep this war going. Now, even if you get your proxy on board, how do you get Europe on board for maybe when the peace still happens, we put troops in Europe? Okay, well, this is never going to fly, right? So meaning whether they can do it in fact or otherwise, it's a fly in the ointment. And I will tell you that it's very possible that Russia wants to use that fly in the ointment as an excuse to keep going. How do you tell me, when Lavrov and Putin stated their terms, and part of those terms were, these are our 5 territories, Crimea, Donetsk, Lugansk, oh God, I hate doing this stuff on the fly, Zaporozhye and Kherson. These are our 5 territories. You need to acknowledge these 5 territories under your laws. Okay, how do you do that? Right. Isn't that fascinating? Like, it's one thing to say this is what we want. It's another thing to say this is what you need to do to end it. And built into what you need to do to end it, it means something. It's not arbitrary. Meaning it's not, okay, that's there and there's no other meaning under it. The meaning under it is that is an unconditional surrender. You will have to acknowledge something that you in the current iteration to which you find yourself would never do. It's never going to happen. which means regime change is built into the process. You need to acknowledge these regions. And if we keep going, sue me, hey, you got some nice legs, girl. You're looking hot in that dress. Hey, Kharkov, you're looking sexy over there. Want a big, strong Russian guy? Meaning, the more you let this linger, the more they keep going, the weaker your defenses get. And the faster the Russian military takes more territory. And with the increased tempo to which they've gone with this, I would say they've kicked it up a notch. Ukraine is getting weaker by the day. If the US is pulling out resources, you're getting weaker by the day. You can't do anything but the bombings. Those bombs are hitting their targets day in, day out. There's no air defense. You're getting weaker by the day. The Ukrainian military will collapse at some point. And I guess Trump's point of view is, talk to me when you reach that point of recognition of reality. It's fascinating. My guest is here. I want to have a conversation with him because I'm super curious on what happens after the war. We are joined with Alex Krainer, my man. He is founder of Krainer Analytics and creator of iSystem Trend Following. He has worked as market analyst, researcher, trader, hedge fund manager since 1996. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainty in Commodities Trading, The Grand Deception, Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. I'm sorry, I don't know what the hell is going on upstairs. Alex, how you doing, man? You doing okay this morning?
Doing well, thank you, Thomas.
Afternoon for you, I should say.
Yeah, it is afternoon for me.
Thank you for joining. By the way, what part of the world are you in?
I'm based in Monaco. That's
France. Is that France? Italy?
South of France. So, yeah, very close to Italy, but it's surrounded by France.
From my understanding, south of France.
It's not a democratic country.
I see.
So
my understanding is gorgeous.
It's a sane place.
It's a sane place. Unlike the hell that is taking place in America right now, where there are riots.
Oh, not just America. Don't think you're special. You know, it's the West in general. Europe is quite an asylum as well.
Europe has become a basket case. I will be honest with you. I've been shocked by what I've been seeing out of Europe.
Yes, it is shocking. It is shocking.
Yeah. For some reason, I consider Europe to be the conscience of America. Maybe I was deluded in that. But yeah, it's just been wild. I am curious on something about Europe, though. From my point of view, the Europeans effectively want to keep this war going, even though it has been damaging their economies. It's clear as day. Germany has been deindustrialized. The Volkswagen, I believe, has been either laying off people or at the very least paying people to retire early because it's not getting the money and funding they would typically get. The amount that they're paying for energy has effectively gone up, which made everything else go up. And some companies can't keep going. And yet, like the little engine that could, Europe continues to keep puttering along, even though it knows that if the US pulls out, it can't carry this on their own. And even these plans to apparently fight the Russians, which seems to be the angle that they're going with, seems to be fraught with political challenges and economic challenges. I am curious, though, at some point this war will stop, whether it's over the table or whether it's on the battlefield. Who is going to foot the bill for Ukraine? And what is Europe's, and maybe let me break this into two parts. Who is going to foot the bill for Ukraine, one? And what is Europe's financial interest in this? I mean, or do they have a financial interest in this? And I guess I can ask the same thing about America. But what is the financial realities that is driving this conflict? Or are there financial realities? Is this just purely geopolitical?
Okay, so you asked a lot of very
That's too many questions. Let me boil that down because I'm sorry.
I know, but they're definitely very, very good questions. I would just, before I say anything about anything, just to clarify, when you say Europe, we can't be talking about some monolith. We need to be talking about the European governing structures, about the let's call it the ruling establishment, which is now a profoundly undemocratic establishment. The democracy, for all practical purposes, has been and is being cancelled. The Europeans only get to vote for the let's call it vetted and acceptable candidates. If the wrong candidate wins, well, then they descend down with lawfare and cancel election or engage in some other kind of administrative subterfuge so that, the will of the people is essentially thwarted. Majority of Europeans don't want to have anything whatsoever to do with this war in Ukraine. So your question is excellent in the sense that what's the financial incentive for it? Because obviously, it's not about freedom and democracy. It's certainly not about human rights of Ukrainians or Europeans or the Russians for that matter. It's about money, but it's not just about, the military industrial complex getting profitable market deals. It goes far, far beyond that. And, to explain that, keep in mind that the natural resource wealth of Ukraine was estimated at between 10 and 12 trillion dollars. The natural resource wealth of Russia has been estimated at between 75 and 90 trillion dollars. Now, that's in Russia, right? So what does that have to do with the Europeans? It doesn't have to do with me or with any ordinary European citizen. It has to do with European banking establishments, generally Western banking establishments, because American banks are just as involved. So the dark magic of the way the banking systems work is that they grow by issuing credit. That is, every time they lend money, that loan becomes an asset on their balance sheets, right? So the more loans they issue, the bigger their balance sheet. And then these loans are all profit-generating assets because you have to pay it back with interest. So it means you're servicing the loan. You're always paying interest to the bank. So it's a form of rentier income against money that they pull out of thin air. But the problem is that in order for them to issue loans, they need collateral to secure the loans, right? And so in any, domestic economy, there comes a point when you've saturated the market with debt. Let's say if you were earning $100,000 a year, you could get a loan from the bank, but they wouldn't give you a $10 million loan. They might give you a $100,000 loan or $500,000 loan, but not $1 million or 10 million or $1 billion, right? Because you don't have sufficient income and you don't have, your possessions are not sufficiently valuable for them to secure the risk in lending you the money, right? They need to have something to repossess.
With one exception, if my last name is Hunter Biden, then I can get that $10 million. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So there's
bad joke.
There's a lot of frost around that. But like in essence, they need in order to issue loans, they need collateral. And so once they've saturated the domestic economy, and then the only way to keep growing your balance sheet is by lowering your credit standards, right? To be making increasingly risky loans, against increasingly questionable collateral. And so for them, the mentioned $12 trillion in Ukrainian natural resource wealth and the $75 trillion in Russian natural resource wealth is a very, very lucrative source for their growth. So that would be tremendous amount of collateral on the basis of which they could then grow their balance sheets, issue massive new loans, and then become very, very profitable. And then, you also have this thing called the fractional reserve lending, which means that basically if you for every dollar that's in circulation, you could issue as much debt as you like, practically, because the reserve requirement since the COVID crisis in the United States has been 0%. So the banks don't need to hold any reserves against the loans they issue. So how does that work? Your balance sheet grows if you make loans to your client. So if I'm Citigroup, my clients are probably companies like ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, KBR, Halliburton, these kinds of multinational corporations. So if they get contracts to develop, let's say, oil and gas resources in Russia, then they're going to need very large loans to do that. So I'm going to lend them money. And then, if I give $1 billion loan to ExxonMobil, that loan now becomes an asset on my book. And now I have another $1 billion on my balance sheet. So I'm growing. What's necessary to do that is you have to gain political control of the target countries. So, that's all very nice, except the Russians might have something to say about that. They might say, like, we have banks here and we have our corporations that can develop that perfectly well. Thank you very much. No deal here. So then you need to move in by force. So you need to either stage a color revolution, assassinate the leader. You need to put some kind of a government in that country that's friendly to you, that's going to be facilitating all that business. And so that's where you get the incentive to foment regime changes, coups, assassinations, or if nothing else works, military conquest. You need to take down the country by force. So they've done that in Ukraine in 2014. They've staged a coup, and so from 2014 on, the government in Kiev has been aligned with the West, which means the gates are open to Western corporations, which means big business for Western banks. And then, not to exonerate the corporations, because they are the very much visible arm of the Western imperialism. They go there, they develop, generally there's a lot of abuse involved, crackdown on labor movements, frequent assassination of union leaders, things like that. And then obviously they are not known for paying good wages, and they're not known for keeping their employees very, very happy. So this is labor is a very important component of that, because the harder you can exploit them, the more profitable your operations are there, and then the more money you can pay back to your banker. And so that is where the source of conflict comes from. This is where you have the clash between two sides, but the banking aspect is not visible, and for any corporation, for any business, in fact, they tend to run their business within what's feasible and what's within the legal framework, meaning that the corporation itself doesn't have a strong incentive to go abroad and look for business on that basis. They could just as easily buy crude oil from Russian companies. Russian companies export, ExxonMobil imports it, buys it off them, and then puts on their margin and resells that, or refines it, distributes it in their own markets in Western Europe, United States, or wherever else they're present.
Right.
So there's no need for them to go into conquest. Furthermore, as far as ExxonMobil, and I'm speaking about ExxonMobil as a thing. It could be
as an
any
example, right?
Yeah. ExxonMobil doesn't really care whether the $1 billion loan comes from JP Morgan or Citigroup, or whether it comes from Gazprom Bank or some Chinese bank. It's all the same to them, The only segment in our economies, and it's a very narrow segment, for whom this colonialism, this imperialism is a zero-sum game, is the banking cartel. Because if some natural resource is collateral on Gazprom Bank's balance sheet, then it's not on JP Morgan's balance sheet. It's either theirs or it's ours.
Right.
So where corporations could adapt themselves and do business on whatever basis is feasible and acceptable and sustainable, they would adapt to that and they would do business on that basis. But the bankers get zero from any resource that they don't control, that isn't on their that isn't their collateral. So they are the ones who are generally always, and I'm not talking just about the United States today, I'm talking about the last few centuries of European history, what we call Western civilization, right? It's always been the money-lending oligarchies that have fomented and instigated colonization, enslavement, imperialism all around the world. And in the process, we wiped out 6 major indigenous civilizations, and we've wiped out countless tribes and smaller kingdoms and cultures and peoples everywhere around the world. There used to be a native population in Tasmania. There's not a single person left. We wiped them out. We've reduced the population of Australian Aborigines by between 90 and 95%, not to speak of Native Americans, South America, Middle America, North America. It's been a very, very ugly process, this thing that we call Western civilization. And I think that it's now becoming clear why that is. There's always a justification that's propagandized to the public.
Right.
They used to call people around the world savages, and then the white man had to come and civilize them and show them the ways of progress and all these wonderful things. And then when that story started to wear thin, now we have freedom and democracy and human rights and stuff like that. But these are just let's call it justifications for something that, if people understood correctly, no American, no European would ever tolerate that. You can see that what's being done to the Palestinians now has caused practically a cultural shift, where before people were supportive of Israel. Now that those ranks are wearing very thin as well. So people do have a conscience, and they do have a value system, and they do have they are in touch with their basic humanity. But the bankers don't care. So they put themselves in control of the media. They tell us tall tales and children's stories about what we're doing around the world. And meanwhile, the business is very ugly. I mean, the Dutch Empire, for example, they would.
Oh yes.
They would.
Leopold Soliloquy.
Exactly. They would take some spice island there in the Pacific, because they wanted to grow whatever cloves, nutmeg for European markets. And of course, the natives then thought, like, I'm sorry, like this is our place. You're not going to be telling us, So they would just slaughter the whole population of the island, all of them, and then bring slaves from Africa to work their plantations. And they did this. Yeah, they did this not once. So this is how we depopulated much of the world, the Western civilization. And these things are now starting to become clear, but not only to us, the public, they're starting to become clear at the receiving end, across Africa and the global South. The Chinese understood this, the Russian understood this, the Indians have understood this. And so now there's a real pushback. Once you're aware of how the parasite operates, then you can build your immune system. And I think that this is why this is now such a huge. It's a beginning of a massive transition, because we're breaking with probably last 5 or 6 centuries of continuity, during which you had an undisputed primacy of the West. And now this is starting to crumble.
Can I try to repeat that? Meaning, can I try to frame that in my words because I want to make sure I understand it, and you can correct me if
Of
I get
course,
something wrong.
yes, of course.
It sounds like you're saying that capitalism gets to the water's edge and it keeps going. All right, we've exploited all the resources we can here. We've done everything that we could. And so a bank would say, okay, so we need more. And we can go to another country to get that more. And if there's somebody who's on that territory, let's say you have oil, gas, minerals, whatever they have that we can effectively exploit, a company will come to the bank and the company would say, hey, we need a loan in order to exploit the resources of that territory, to which the bank is more than happy to give. But in order to do that, the bank at the very least needs, let's say, a military to take it if the people aren't willing to give it. This goes economic hitman, right? And
Correct.
so you get the government who's paid a lot of money by business owners, banks, the wealthy, to effectively push that agenda, to go to those locations, overthrow those governments. And once that government is overthrown or pacified, at this point now, the companies can come in, and those companies will require loans from banks. So banks can put that on their balance sheet as an asset. Am I getting it right? I just want to make sure I got that right. That's the connection.
Yeah, exactly. That's ballpark very much right. I would correct you that, the banks don't say we need more. They say we want more, because they don't need more. We could arrange our monetary system in a different way. The way it's arranged now is that unless it's growing, it becomes very unstable. So it's only,
Right.
It's almost like a bicycle. Unless you're pedaling forward, you fall off. So the problem is that when the bank issues you a loan, let's say they give you $100,000, well, you're going to have to pay that back with interest, whatever amount that is. But let's say if it's a typical mortgage, you're going to end up paying it twice, right? So they lend you $100,000, you're going to be paying back $200,000, except only the principal went into circulation. They credited your account by the amount of the principal. The interest amount never went into circulation. So how are you going to earn back 100,000 plus interest to service your loan?
It's future profits.
You're going to have to earn it from other people. You're going to have to do business, get a job, second job, third job. You're going to have to earn that money to be able to pay back your bank. Now, the only way for the extra $100,000 to enter circulation so that you're even able to earn it is by other people or governments or companies taking on loans so that money enters into circulation. Let's say company XYZ gets a big loan, they hire you, you earn money. So in order for people to be able to service their loans, the system has to continually grow, right?
You're saying it's forced.
Like a massive Ponzi scheme.
You're saying it's forced. They have to do it. Like, meaning, if this market is saturated, the only way I can really pay that loan off is if that bank or more money is getting into circulation. And the only way more money can get into circulation is if the banks or governments are exploiting more resources, which is going to take them abroad by definition. They have to do it.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, they don't really have to. They could choose to do business on a different basis. And I'll give you a different example.
Please.
Up until about 15 years ago, one of the greatest economic successes was Germany. It was the number one exporting superpower in the world. The value of their exports was even greater than China's until, 10, 15 years ago. And, people know about German products like Mercedes and BMW and, things like this. But the bulk of German exports were companies you never heard about. That they're like basically small and medium-sized businesses that specialized in some kind of an obscure widget that goes into some other widget that then you buy as a finished product as part of I don't know what, So a lot of these exporting companies out of Germany were what you would call market champion. And market champion was defined as is defined as a company that occupies first, second, or third
Wow.
position in terms of market share in the world. Okay, so Germany had 1,200 market champions about 15
Are
years ago.
you serious?
Yeah, and the distant second was the United States with about 250 market champions. Now, how did that happen? You know, we get all these children's tales about excellent German engineering and hardworking, disciplined Germans, blah, blah, blah. That's not the explanation. The explanation was in the German banking system, because German banking traditionally has always been literally thousands of small local and regional banks that would support local, small, and medium-sized companies. And they would, it wasn't unheard of for banks to issue 100-year loans to their clients in Germany.
Wow.
And then provide them all kinds of, so imagine if you were an entrepreneur and you knew you could do something, you could build some widget of your own and sell it to the world. And then you talk to your local banker and you say, I need $1 million. And they say, well, okay, you know, Jamal, we know you, you're a clever, responsible guy. You're hardworking. You're from a good family. All right. We'll give you $1 million. And then not only that, they would be intimately involved with the growth of the business. You know, they would frequently visit, tour the facilities, give advice, you know, financial and economic advice, encourage them to go to fairs. If you had a 100 million loan, that means you had all kinds of maneuvering space to develop your business, you know, overcome the childhood diseases of the business, develop it slowly without slaving to the imperative of quarterly earnings and profits. And, you know, you could develop your business over the long term. And then, you know, in the second generation, people would send their kids to study, you know, whatever, chemistry, engineering, whatever they were doing. And then, you know, the kids would come back with new ideas and new knowledge about how to advance, refine, perfect their production process and marketing and all of these things. And that's how Germany, from the bottom up, incubated these 1,200 market champions, which made Germany a superpower in terms of export in the world. Now, this is thanks to the funding that they obtained from local, regional banks, 70% of which were non-profit institutions. So these banks were not in it for big, giant, massive profits. They were operating pretty much as a public utility, allocating credit to productive industries in their regions. So, you know, there's no reason why a banking system in any country couldn't operate that way. This rapacious colonialist approach that we have in certain Western countries ruled by the, you know, too big to fails is a choice. They choose to do this. They don't have to. They want to, and they choose to do this. And now, you know, you have to ask yourself, why on earth are they choosing this? It's evil. It's immoral. It's making the world into the hell that it is everywhere. And it's not just exploiting people's, you know, brown people around the world. It's exploiting the domestic populations as well. Because if you look at, you know, this started, you know, already with the Venetians, and you know, if you study history of the way things were back then, Spanish Empire, you know, when they were hauling in hundreds, thousands of tons of gold and silver from South America, well, people in Spain were miserable and poor. Victorian England, you know, same. If you read Charles Dickens novels, you realize that, yeah, that was the British Empire in its zenith, but the British people in Britain were living in a very miserable way. Upton Sinclair, you know, his writings about the United States around the same time, it was miserable. And now we see that we had a good period in the post-World War II era, right? But we see that all of those things are deteriorating, and we see growth in poverty, growth in homelessness, drug addiction. So all of those Dickensian, qualities of society are making a comeback, and it's always this one and the same system that we're talking about, which is basically misery at home and mayhem abroad.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing now in the conflict.
That's what we're seeing
in
now.
Europe.
Yes, exactly. In the United States and in Europe and in Canada, to a good extent, maybe not uniformly, but Alberta is a resource-rich country, so a province, so things look a bit brighter there. But you go elsewhere, you see the same thing as you see in the United States cities.
Mm-hmm.
Britain is a horrible basket case, and is basically the birthplace of this system. Well, no, it's not a birthplace, but it's the birthplace of its modern
Equivalent.
Yeah, exactly. The birthplace is maybe the Roman Empire, or maybe Greek and Greece of antiquity.
Mm-hmm. So that answers the question. Why would governments, when they can see themselves failing and declining economically because of their behavior, continue the behavior? And I think your point is, well, from their point of view, everything that the entire economic model on some level demands them, or at the very least incentivizes them to do it that way, because that is the way they've done it for decades or for centuries at this point. So they have to get the resources of Ukraine, which they did. They have to get the resources of Russia. It's $70 trillion. It would effectively pay back all of the investment that they've dumped into it. In fact, if they could have gotten their hands on Russia, it would have easily paid back like 10 times, 20 times over what they've invested into it. But they didn't get their hands on Russia.
Yeah, that's right. Because
that's the issue, right?
The damn Russians won't give us their won't let us have our resources, which are rightfully ours.
Right. The Russians just so happen to be born in the wrong place.
Exactly. And then you could the same story holds for Iran and for the Middle East in general, and any part of the world. And once you digest this, once you understand the core principle behind it, you realize to what extent everything else is just peddling narrative and propaganda. When you look at Iran and they're talking about the nuclear deal, no nuclear deal, enrichment, no enrichment, whether the mullahs are bad or good, or state sponsor of terror, all of this nonsense, none of it is relevant in the slightest. That is all just for public consumption. It is all just to give themselves the justification and a pretext to take down the government if they can. Everything else is just fluff and foam and a hollow story. It's always about the resources, and it's only about the resources, which includes the local population, because the resources won't get themselves over to us. Somebody has to dig them up. Somebody has to do the work. So you need to enslave the population as well.
Does Trump know that? And does political leaders know that? I mean, look, some of these people are neocons. And some of these people, look, I agree with everything that has just come out of your mouth. I am blown away by how succinct you've been able to explain that. Some of these people are neocons, and they have an ideological worldview that incentivizes them to behave a particular way. But do they know that? Like when they are in the political space?
I don't think that they do, Jamal. I don't think that they do. The people who do know it is a high-level military personnel, usually after they've served their terms, and they realize, very strange. If you read Smedley Butler's
War's a Racket,
he figured it out, but after a lifetime of serving them, and then he said, I've been I forget the exact words, but he says I've been serving the bankers' interests.
Yep.
And then I spoke with Glenn Deason last week, and he told me that in the meantime he has met a person who worked their whole career for British intelligence. And this person told me, the whole thing is just about collateral. That's it. And so, people at high level of intelligence agencies,
They know it.
high level of military brass, they understand because they work it out. Of course, they're never told these. Like the bankers don't come and they tell them, hey, clear out Middle East for me because there's lots of oil there and I want that on my balance sheets. They tell them, free trade, human rights, democracy, freedom, blah, 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 and they recruit and select people for being dumb to buy that bullshit, right?
Yeah.
They don't select for high intellectual capacity. And you can see that, they put people like Justin Trudeau and Keir Starmer and Ursula von der Leyen and Kaja Kallas. And you can see that these people have low IQ. At room temperature level, they're really dumb. They don't understand anything, and they are seduced by these stories about progress and human rights and all these nice things, and maybe they never figure it out. I think it's the people who actually dirty their hands and bloody their hands with the actual work who end up traumatized by it enough that they say, like, why are we doing this? And then they have to work out an answer for themselves. And then they realize, holy shit, we're always fighting for the resources. Why? We can, you don't need to have a military base in the Middle East to have oil. You can just buy it from countries that export it, right? It's what every other country does. Switzerland doesn't have military bases around the world. They still have oil at their gas pumps, right? They just trade for it. The United States could do the same. Britain could do the same, but it's the bankers who need political control of these nations in order to, by magic of their fraudulent monetary system, to turn other nations' resources into their assets. That's the magic, and that's the whole reason for everything.
You pointed out that other countries are becoming aware of it. That basically the global south, Russia, China, in fact, these countries that were exploited, China suffered 100 years of humiliation. They say never again. Russia suffered through the Yeltsin era. Again, never again. You get the global south that has started to, I'm saying grow up. I don't mean this as if they're children. I just mean economically become more robust. You get Africa, especially Sahel states, that have decided to come together saying, why are we poor? I think that was one of the most fascinating things from Ibrahim Traore. And it's so radically self-aware, right? It's like we have the most resources probably than anywhere else in the globe. And yet we are poor. We don't even have roads. Exactly. How does this work?
After a whole century of colonization, they're still poor.
Yeah,
and we, the sanctimonious Europeans, we never hesitate to lecture them about corruption and rule of law and all of this nonsense. We have been keeping them poor deliberately, and you know why? Because if they grew rich, they might absorb their own resources in their own economies.
Exactly.
So we want them to not have any nuclear power stations. We want them to not have any gold refineries, oil refineries. We don't want them to drive cars. We just want them to extract all that stuff for us. So they have to remain poor. And then, when people are poor and uneducated, then they're much easier to control as well.
Yeah. What happens when that process stops, when that wheel breaks? Because it seems like, as you pointed out, that wheel, I don't think people in Europe knows what you just said. I don't think people in the US knows what you just said. I don't think they have any awareness of it. The people in the global south.
No, because nobody will tell you, Jamal. It took me 40 years to work it out. Do you know when I started obsessing about this?
What, during the Iraq War?
No, back in the mid 1980s, because I was 16 years old. Sting went to the Brazilian rainforest to save the natives and the rainforest, to raise awareness about what's going on there, because they were cutting it down, for for timber, for planting soybean fields and so forth.
Yeah.
And back then I was 16, and I read stories about Sting's activism, but intuitively I knew that everything he was doing there was futile, because this has been centuries of Western conquest and subjugation, colonialism, and so forth. And I thought, there's something very, very powerful behind all this. What is it? And I thought, if I speak to an American, if I speak to a German person, a British person, they're not pathologically greedy, evil people who are ready to kill you to take your stuff. They're human beings like you and I, like any African person, like any Russian, Chinese person. So it's not in the people. So we couldn't just say like, oh, Brits are bad, so let's just get rid of Brits and everything's going to be fine. It had to be something systemic. But, there are no textbooks to explain you this. I studied economics. I was the big geek who, graduated with almost all, I try to learn my shit.
Yeah.
Nobody tells you. And in fact, they deliberately leave some pieces of the puzzle missing, so you can never really get the big picture. I worked 15 years as a hedge fund manager. And your job as a hedge fund manager is to try to figure out how the world works. So you know how to invest and how to not get killed. And so you would spend 4, 5, 6 hours a day reading shit, papers and books and articles, and listen to interviews and lectures and go to conferences and talk to people. And it took me literally my lifetime to kind of come to this conclusion. But once you come to this conclusion, and once you realize what they've been hiding from us
Can't unsee
forever, you start seeing it everywhere. Like every story you read now, you will see like, yes, okay, this is what's going on. And things become a lot more predictable and a lot less mysterious, because they always tell us, oh, these centuries-old hatred, these people went against these people because they can't stand each other. Or they tell you that in history, Napoleon went to conquer Russia because of his own ego. He wanted to build a big empire. Excuse me, who paid for his army? That's kind of a big army.
Right.
That's kind of a big army and a very major undertaking. Who paid for it? Where did he come up with the money for that? They never tell you these things. It's always about, oh, this country was aggressive. Oh, this general was very ambitious. Oh, this king had a massive ego. No, it's always the money-lending oligarchies that co-opt the whole political process, and that tell the politicians, this is what we want. We're going to lend you money. We're going to give you money, but we need this. You need to go to war against the Dutch or the Spanish or the French or whoever. So, that's where it's all at. And we will never transcend this until we reform the monetary system.
Well, for that to happen, someone has to lose, and lose significantly.
Well,
And
yeah, the
Ukraine-
inbred degenerates of this world who are stirring the pot nonstop for centuries, they have to lose. Well, tough shit,
Yeah.
they
Oh, no,
can't-
I don't mean that as a
they-
negative. I actually mean that as a positive. I mean,
Oh, right.
someone has to break the wheel. Like the wheel just can't be going. At some point, it has to break.
Yeah,
Who
we can't keep going like this.
Who pays for Ukraine? I mean, if Europe didn't get what they needed out of Russia, because Russia effectively kicked ass, who pays for that? Is
I
that
think that in the end, they're gonna be fleecing European taxpayers in one way or another. They're gonna be pitching these bonds. They're probably going to be issuing bonds. And since nobody in the world is going to be interested in any of these bonds, they're going to be forcing them on people's pension funds. They're going to create legal incentives and monetary incentives for pension funds and insurance companies and all of this whole shadow banking system to kind of coerce them to buy these bonds. And so what's going to happen, they're going to take the pension pot of the European people, and they're going to buy these bonds, and that money is going to be shoveled towards the military-industrial complex, towards Ukraine, towards Vladimir Zelensky cocaine habit, and everything that's required to keep the war going.
What happens when that wheel breaks? I was watching, I was reading, I guess I was watching a graph, I'm not sure if that sounds right. I was looking at a graph by Pickney, I believe his name is, an economist. And he was showing how it was extractive capitalism, basically the way that colonies were extracting resources from South America, from Africa, from these places that impoverished those countries. And that if it wasn't for that extractive capitalism, and I'm saying extract capital, but that extractive relationship between these two, that they would have, Europe would have been a debtor nation. The US would have been a debtor nation. I mean, it is now, but it would have been much worse. And that it was only because of the colonial relationship between these countries that Europe was able to effectively have more wealth, more gold. And these countries ended up being as poor as they are. What happens when that wheel is broken and that process of go to that country because that country now is strong enough to withstand you from going to that country, and you have to effectively deal with your countries at its water's edge? What happens to these countries, Europe and the US, under that model?
Well, that's exactly the most interesting part of everything, Jamal, because we don't know. It's a blank sheet, and if we arm ourselves with knowledge and understanding and a general idea of what we want out of life, then we can fill out that page. You know, we can devise any kind of social arrangement that we want, any kind of monetary system that makes sense, so long as we know what we're doing. If we don't know what we're doing, they're always going to slip in their experts and advisors who are going to tell us, oh, you don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. We know how the money system works. We know how banking works. We're just going to set it all up for you, start from a blank slate, and then start the same wheel of history from scratch that always goes in the predictable direction of, again, exploitation and colonialism and imperialism and allocating massive amounts of society's wealth to the military-industrial complex for security, things like that, for our own good, or else we can demand solutions that suit what ordinary humans want, which is not complicated either. We want a peaceful, prosperous life. We want our children to be happy. We want hang out with our neighbors, to travel, stuff,
Basic things,
basic ordinary things. But we're going to have to take an active part. And the United States is now in a place where it could start making that transition, but it's going to have to, American people are going to have to continue to pressure their governments to deliver what the people want and to not deliver what people don't want. Because, one of the strange things about this democracy is that, people want safe streets and prosperity and good jobs and vacation time and all these nice things, but somehow we can never afford that.
Right.
And all these things that people don't want, like wars and military bases and the big control matrix grid, well, somehow we can afford all that.
Yep.
And we have a democracy, by the way, so
I think that's just what they call it.
Yeah.
Alex, man, this was a fantastic breakdown, I swear.
Thank you very much.
Distinct, spot on, and explained it in a way that the audience could understand it. We have nearly 3,000 people here live streaming, watching. I mean,
awesome. Hello, 3,000 people.
I know, right? They were like, wow, what is this? Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. Alex Krainer.
My pleasure, Jamal. Always good to join you. Greetings to all your viewers and listeners. And until the next time.
You have a good one, man. You be safe. Alex Krainer, he's founder of Krainer Analytics. Bye-bye. And creator of iSystems Trend Following. He has worked as a market analyst, researcher, trade, hedge fund manager since 1996. He has authored several books, including Mastering Uncertainties in Commodities Trading, The Grand Deception, and Alex Krainer's Trend Following Bible. That was a fantastic breakdown. Thank you for this. You be safe.
Take care. Bye.
All right. Going from one great interview to another. A good friend of this show, the man himself, Dimitri Lascaris. He is a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Dimitri ran for the leadership of the Green Party in Canada. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm just fine. Thank you very much, Jamal. How are you doing?
I am doing well, man. Thank you for joining me. He also runs Reason to Resist, the YouTube channel. I should have put that in, but I remember it off the top of my head. I had the opportunity to look through the channel the other day. You do fantastic work. Yeah, you kick ass. You really do. And even when you come on the show, you're kicking ass. So the audience gets just a droplet of Dimitri here. You get to have a more full-throated version of him on his channel. So definitely check his channel out.
Well, you're
Dimitri,
kicking ass as much as anybody, Jamal. I have to say you're doing great stuff. You really are. And I say that to everybody that I mention your program to. You're really doing great.
thank you. I appreciate that. I try. This is all I do. This is my life at this point. So hopefully I'm doing it well. So Iran has scored a big spy op. Now, usually we hear Mossad is everywhere. Mossad is, the 25-eye monster that is just everywhere doing everything. It has files on everybody, can kill anybody in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very rare occasion where Iran has come out saying, we have this massive intelligence operation. We were able to get our hands on all sorts of sensitive data from Israel, and we will release that data very soon. But they have been putting out tidbits of information. And some of the tidbits are fascinating. For one, they're outed, quote unquote, everybody knew Israel has nukes, right? So this notion that they outed it is a little funny. But they were effectively saying, look, we know where the sites are. We know the relationships that have been taking place between Western governments and Israel in relation to their nuclear program. And something else they said that is explosive, and they are going to have to prove, by the way, they have to prove all of this, meaning they're going to have to release this information. It can't just be take our word for it. But they're saying, and I actually believe it, that the IAEA was working in tandem with Israel, and that it gave them names of Iranian scientists, with those Iranian scientists being assassinated by Israel. That is explosive. Now, this goes to the ICC, where the ICC is supposed to be independent. And of course, they told, I forget the gentleman's name, the barrister, hey, you're supposed to go after African dictators, not after countries that we like Israel. Cut it out. And now it seems you get the Atomic Energy Agent, that's not Atomic Energy Agency, the agency that was looking over Syria, that obviously was being maneuvered, where the actual inspectors who were on the ground, they effectively got rid of those people, rewrote the report to make it look like Syria had chemical weapons. And now you get this, where it seems that the IAEA, something that's supposed to be an independent organization, is not independent in the least, and is working hand in hand with enemies of this country to undermine this country by having its people killed. That is explosive. Give me your take on that. I mean, that's mind-blowing.
Well, let me start by saying a few things about the leaks generally. This followed months of reports out of Israel that they were arresting Israelis who they alleged were part of a spy ring for Iran. And given that happened, that preceded these leaks of information, I suspect that what has happened here is that it came to a point where all of these arrests had convinced the Iranians that their spy network in Israel was compromised. Perhaps it had been completely dismantled as a result of these arrests. And so they finally said, well, there's no point in our concealing this information anymore because the flow of information has been cut off. And so they went public with the fact that they had engaged in effective espionage for probably some years. So I'm just saying that I think all of these arrests in Israel, immediately preceding this announcement, lends credibility.
Yeah. And by the way, the IAEA has also said that these are legit, that basically Iran has something, that they got their hands on some information. So even the IAEA acknowledges they got something. Whatever we don't know exactly what it is, but they got something. And
And
Iran has been crowing for the last several days about it. I want them to release it. They're like, we're going to release it to our friends. We're going to release it to the public, certain parts of the data. It seems like they're sifting through a lot of data in order to decide what they're going to release versus what they're going to keep for themselves. But
Right.
if that is demonstrated that the IAEA was effectively working hand in hand, and they also point out that, you know, the relationship between, let's say, Netanyahu and some other governments in the West that lecture Iran about their nuclear program, when instead they know that this program is peaceful, but they use that Israel is like paying people off. They talk about Israel paying governments off for the Abraham Accords. I mean, it is a lot of data that they are saying that they have access to from these leaks. And Israel has been very quiet. Have you noticed that?
Hmm. Absolutely. But the thing is, Jamal, that, you know, because the Israelis know they have information, they clearly believe that Iran has information. Otherwise, why would they be arresting all these people?
Right.
And the scope of the information seems vast. We shouldn't assume that everything that Iran says is true. What some of the claims they're making might themselves be kind of, you know, information operations to put the leadership of Israel into a state of extreme uncertainty about what they do not have, right? So, but having said that, this allegation against Grossi, first of all, it is shocking, but at the same time, when you look at Grossi's history, and what I'm thinking of particularly is how the IAEA conducted itself in regard to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in Ukraine, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, which has been under the control of Russian troops for, I think, for almost the entire period of the special military operation, more than 3 years. It was repeatedly attacked by the Ukrainians. This idea that was circulating in the corporate media in the West that Russia was, you know, bombing
its own, right? Which makes no sense, right? You have Russian troops stationed at the plant, and they're like, Russia's just bombing its own nuclear power plant.
And if Grossi's, you know, the leader of an organization charged with nuclear security, if that's what he should have denounced this in absolutely unambiguous terms. This was an insanely dangerous thing, which it was clear the Ukrainians were doing. And I didn't see a peep come out of this man, not a peep of condemnation of what Ukraine was doing. So, but this is a different, I mean, you know, keeping your mouth shut in this politically explosive situation is one thing, but helping Israel to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists, it seems to me, is even worse, even more egregious. And the problem here is that even if it isn't exactly true, but the Iranians believe it is true, I don't know how Iran can continue to cooperate with the IAEA. If it is led by somebody they believe to be that compromised, and if it is true, it has implications not just for Iran's dealings with the IAEA. It has implications for the entire world. You know, this organization is corrupt to the core. If it is capable of whatever one may think of Iran's government, right? Whatever one may think of its nuclear program, if it is capable of providing highly sensitive information to a genocidal apartheid state that has repeatedly engaged in the most aggressive and provocative behavior, including the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists, which are war crimes. These are war crimes, okay? Then how can anybody trust this organization? The organization at that point is so compromised that it either needs to replace its entire leadership, starting at the very top, or we need to come up with some other regulatory structure for the nuclear industry in the world today. But this is a serious, serious blow. If there's any truth to this, it is a devastating, fatal blow to the credibility of the IAEA. And that is something that should be of great concern to us all because of the role it plays in nuclear security.
Well, there's also another problem with this. Israel has nukes. And so the idea that you are, again, I know we have to keep prefacing this by if this is true, because you're right. Some of this stuff could be information operations. Like the stuff about Netanyahu, that would be a little bit weird to be in a database, right? But I guess my point is, this could be true. And it sounds true to me. Like I know how the ICC works, right? Where they would go after an African dictator. They would go after the guy from the Philippines. And yet you have the US invading a country, Afghanistan being party to the Rome Statute. And it takes forever for them to do anything. Look how long it took them to move on Israel. Israel had been killing people for over a year. And it looked like it took everything in them to make the decision to move in this way, meaning these bodies seem to be compromised in general, especially depending upon who's leading the body. For God's sake, they put Annalena Baerbock as head of the United Nations. That lunatic, that pretty lunatic, and I'll say that pretty lunatic because I think she's gorgeous. But I guess my point is these organizations seem to be compromised with Western leaders in these organizations that don't seem to be able to transcend where they come from in order to allow the organization to function as an independent entity, and instead settle political scores. And I don't know what entity needs to be created to avoid that process. From your point of view as a lawyer, if Iran, like right now, for example, the IAEA is saying that Iran is doing nuclear tests that breaches the Non-Proliferation Act. Okay, but if Iran is right and it's compromised, then how can you trust what the IAEA is coming out with in regards to the tests?
Absolutely. It has zero credibility, no credibility. I think the IAEA is, for reasons I've articulated and others which I haven't mentioned, that its credibility was severely degraded long ago. But this is a death blow. This is a death blow to its credibility.
Step into that. What was the long ago items?
Well, I think I haven't seen a peep coming out of the IAEA over decades that Israel, technically speaking, it's the only state in West Asia that is not a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right.
So that places constraints on what the IAEA can do with respect to Israel, but it certainly could have played an advocacy role all these years and said, this is extremely dangerous. It is extremely dangerous that a state that conducts itself in this way has enough nukes to provoke a nuclear winter and potentially kill billions of human beings. So you, the international community, need to be doing something about the fact that Israel has a nuclear arsenal. Instead, what Western governments were doing was they were pretending it doesn't exist. They refused even to talk about it. The height of irresponsibility given Israel's behavior. So to my mind, the mere fact that the IAEA leadership all these decades was completely silent on this extraordinary danger that Israel's nuclear arsenal poses to humanity was itself a real dark stain on its credibility as a nuclear regulator for the protection of the global community. But then this thing, as I mentioned, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, was a further blow. And this, I mean, it's all over. And for in terms of the legitimacy of this organization, if it's true. Now, when it comes to what you said about, Annalena Baerbock, this frothing at the mouth, dangerous neocon, the United States is effectively the U.S. government. It's really a stunning accomplishment of sort of, its hegemonic agenda. It has effectively co-opted every major international organization. You look at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is based in Washington. It is entirely a tool of U.S. imperialism, right? And, has been inflicting upon peoples of the global South for decades at the behest of the U.S. government, vicious programs of austerity, and has indebted them and enslaved them effectively, made them, debt serfs. This was all done at the behest of the U.S. government. In the United Nations, you mentioned the president of the UN General Assembly, Baerbock. What about Antonio Guterres, who I believe was, prime minister of
good point.
Of Portugal? Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the human rights situation in occupied Palestine, put out a tweet yesterday or the day before in which she was, castigating Antonio Guterres for doing nothing about the expulsion of Israel from the United Nations.
Right.
He's just sitting there on his hands. Well, the UN Security Council won't act because we all know that, the United States would veto any initiative to expel Israel. That doesn't mean he shouldn't have been out there advocating for it. He should have been advocating for it. What does it take for somebody to merit expulsion from the United Nations? Hasn't Israel crossed that line a long time ago? If that doesn't merit expulsion from the United Nations, I don't know. So at least he should have been out there using his bully pulpit.
Would the U.S. been able to veto that? I mean, can one nation veto every other nation around the globe? I mean, it would have been the U.S. and Israel and some rando state, tiny country that's trying to gain favor with the U.S. versus the entirety of the world saying expel them. Does 3 states, what is the number that's necessary to expel a state from the United Nations?
Well, as I understand, and I could be wrong about this, Jamal, I remember looking into this some months ago, but my understanding is it's not sufficient for the UN General Assembly to support the expulsion of a state from the UN. I think this has to be. I could be mistaken about this, but my understanding has been that the UN Security Council has to bless that decision, and that.
Are you serious?
I believe that's the case. Now, and certainly that's what's suggested by Francesca Albanese's tweet. She said, "Don't wait for the UN Security Council to act." But in any event, it doesn't. Whatever the formal mechanisms may be whereby this can be accomplished. And by the way, let's just point out that even if we ignore the veto that the UN Security Council, the veto power of the permanent members, even if this was something that the UN General Assembly could do without the imprimatur of the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly is to a large extent co-opted by the United States. You know, it's full of these tiny little states like Micronesia and Nauru and the Marshall Islands, were all effectively just arms of the U.S. government's foreign policy. That's all they are. And they have a tiny little population, and their vote counts for as much as that of China or India, or the Russian Federation, which is preposterous. There should be some system of weighted voting. So what the U.S. has done within the General Assembly, first of all, is it completely dominates these tiny island states that have a vote equivalent to that of the larger non-Western states. And secondly, on any vote that is of extreme importance to the United States, undoubtedly a vote to expel Israel would be, it uses its economic power to cajole and pressure and intimidate states that aren't necessarily vassals of the U.S., but nonetheless are very vulnerable to U.S. Retaliation. It cajoles them into not supporting initiatives in the General Assembly that they would otherwise be supporting. This has happened again and again and again. I think this happened, for example, in the case of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, what we call in the West the invasion. The General Assembly, a lot of its members, I think, ended up condemning Russia's invasion, not necessarily because they wanted to take a side. Their inclination probably was, let's just stay out of this. There's legitimate complaints on the Russian side. We don't want to get involved. But the U.S. pressured them and threatened them behind the scenes. And you've seen reports about this for decades.
Yes.
How the U.S. plays this nasty, nefarious game. So even the UN General Assembly, to a significant degree, has been co-opted by the United States. And so these institutions, as a result of all of this, as I think you've indicated quite rightly, their legitimacy is so compromised at this stage that I think we basically need a new international legal architecture.
Yeah, I just don't know what that looks like and how that even worked. Like how to even get to that front. I mean, because the UN Security Council makes anything impossible. I mean, short of an alien invasion, I don't know what the agreement will be upon what it could act. This was Israel being asked. This was an Israeli official, I believe this was a couple of days ago. And he's being asked about nukes. Listen to what he says. This is a fantastic question.
Why should the world tolerate you having nuclear weapons and not, say, Iran?
First, again, we never admitted to have such weapons. But the very comparison is, I must say, it's very insulting. And I tell you why. We suffered one Holocaust. We listened to our neighbors.
Is it because of the Holocaust that you should be allowed to have nuclear weapons?
You know what? This interview was finished now.
He said, it is very insulting that you're asking me why we should have nukes. And they always said this, right? Blood libel that you're asking me this question. And then the guy says, is it because of the Holocaust? Something that you just said, right? He was like, well, we suffered a Holocaust. Yeah. Is it because of the Holocaust? That's why you have nukes? This interview is over. I'm done with this interview.
Yeah.
That is hilarious.
Yeah, I think the second question proved to the Israeli that this man was serious about going down that path, and he said, "I better bail out of here before the questions get really tough." So, anyway.
Oh, that clip is hilarious. He said, "I never said we never said we had nukes." He says that we suffered a Holocaust. I love the fact that you're like, 50 years ago we suffered a Holocaust. Oh, so is it the Holocaust? I'm out of this. We're done with this question. We're done with this. I love that. I love the fact that we're asking him that finally. I love the fact that finally someone acknowledges, yes, you do have nukes. Everybody knows it's the worst kept secret in the world that you guys have nukes. And the question becomes, what do you do with it if you acknowledge it? I know the U.S. law kicks in if they acknowledge it. If Iran puts the stuff and the information out, it goes to the UN, it's aired before the world. can they still just not acknowledge that they have nukes? Does it work that way? I don't know the law around this.
Well, I guess they're not under strictly speaking a legal obligation to acknowledge that they have nukes. They're not a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right.
So the fact that they developed an arsenal, no one can argue, and I certainly wouldn't, that they violated the treaty because they're not a member of the treaty.
Yeah, the sovereign state.
But
Right.
that doesn't mean that's not an existential threat to humanity. It is an existential threat to humanity that these bloodthirsty lunatics have a nuclear arsenal. And in that response, this is the Israeli government does this every day, every minute of every day. He's conflating the Jewish people with the Zionist colony. Okay, it was the Jewish people that were subjected to these horrors at the hands of Europeans, not Palestinians or other Arabs, at the hands of Europeans, white Europeans, not the Zionist entity. It didn't even exist at that point in time. So, and if you look at the Jewish population living in the West today, although there have been a couple of incidents recently, including the killing of the 2 Israeli embassy staffers in Washington, there have been some isolated incidents during this genocide in particular of violence against persons who are Jewish, but who are perceived, I think, rightly to be pro-Israel or working for Israel. Nonetheless, the overall status of the Jewish people living in Western states has been quite secure for quite some time.
Yeah.
There are millions and millions of Jewish persons living in Western countries in security, and they don't need a nuclear arsenal. And many of them, in fact, are living in countries that have nukes, like the United States, Britain, and France. So there's no need for Israel to have nukes in order to provide security to the Jewish people. That's just a flagrant lie.
It is terrifying to me that they have nukes, especially considering they're so belligerent. And the New York Times, again, I'm very skeptical of this peace process. I don't know what is in Trump's mind, but whatever is in Trump's mind is different from what is in the mind of people who are around him, who are far more savvy in regards to what their political objectives are. And so Trump is like, there's this impasse on this notion of enrichment, where Iran is like, dude, we're a sovereign state. Who the F are you to tell us that we can or cannot enrich? Israel has nukes. Go talk to them, right? And Trump is like, well, they can't have enrichment. They can't have enrichment. He said it recently. And so they're at loggerheads. Now, Trump, at some point, is going to have to come to a decision on whether or not, are we going to bomb Iran? Are we going to let Israel bomb Iran? Now, he has told Netanyahu, will you please stop saying you're going to bomb Iran in the media? Like, will you stop saying that, according to the New York Times? And that Trump seems to be still pushing under this notion of negotiations, under some mythical belief that he can get them to give up what they consider to be a sovereign right, and not just consider to be is a sovereign right, which is, from my point of view, they should have already created a nuke. If it was me, I would have already done it. That's the only way North Korea is remaining safe. That's the only way states remain safe, especially considering the rapaciousness of Israel that has shown no compunction of murdering large scores of people, and Iran will be under that boot also if given any chance of Israel succeeding in this. So the fact that the question is lingering in the air on what does the U.S. do? And the Iranian military has just come out and say, we will decimate America's bases if you attack us. He said it flat out. We will kill Americans if you have military strikes against us. That's assuming that America is involved. From Israel's point of view, America would get involved in order to help Israel, even if Trump says he's not. And because of those nukes, can Israel blackmail the U.S. into getting involved? Hey, if you don't help us, we're going to go nuclear. What does the U.S. do under that model? Like, I don't think people realize how dangerous a country like this having nukes is.
Yeah, if they double, I think you and I have had this discussion before. I have no doubt that Israel would nuke Iran if Iran, they'd think about it seriously. I don't know whether they'd actually do it, but would they give it serious consideration, and are they capable of it? If Iran delivers one or more devastating blows with its conventional missiles to Israel, absolutely. That should be, any rational person should be operating on the assumption, given Israel's behavior, that it's capable of doing it.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly what the Iranians are concerned about. And that's why they have shown so much, one of the reasons why they've shown so much restraint in the face of decades of Israeli provocations and criminality directed at Iran and its people. But let me just say something about this prospect of war with Iran, Jamal.
Please.
Whenever I see a report in the media, particularly the Western corporate media, about the U.S. government pressuring Israel to do anything, I just
Laugh.
it's just noise to me. Like, it could be true, but it's probably just bullshit. So because the U.S. government, has, all Western governments have a public relations motivation to distance themselves from the aggression and the crimes of Israel. They want to be able to say, hey, man, we tried to stop them. We tried to reason with these people, but they live in a tough neighborhood. They're surrounded by these evil, Jew haters, and they want to destroy Israel. And so even though we didn't want them to do it, and even though we wish they hadn't done it, now that they've done it, we have to protect them. We have no choice but to involve ourselves. There's this whole shtick that's been going on for decades. And I think that the more likely interpretation of what is going on is that the Trump administration, partly because it's under so much pressure from psychopaths like Lindsey Graham in the Senate to go to war with Iran, it probably is inclined to go to war with Iran. It may not be particularly excited about the prospect, but it is keenly aware of the fact that the public, and a poll just came out which showed this, most Americans want nothing to do with war with Iran. And there's going to be a political price to pay if the U.S. gets into a full-blown war with Iran, a huge price to pay. And Trump is positioning himself to say, we tried to stop it. We tried to negotiate with the Iranians. They were unreasonable. We tried to tell the Israelis don't attack them. The Israelis, because they felt so threatened by this evil monster, had to do it. Now we have no choice, American people. This is what I think is coming, and I hope very much that I'm wrong. But I think that's plausible.
I agree with everything you just said, because otherwise, why come out with it? There are some people who are Donald Trump apologists, and they aggravate the hell out of me, even though there's some of them come on the show. I love the fact that they come on the show. I love them to death. But that I hate that they're apologists for the Trump administration. Trump didn't know anything about the strikes on Russia. He had no idea that was going to happen. Nobody told him that this was taking place. And it's like, are you serious right now? And the same thing with this. Why, if you're trying to get a deal, if I'm trying to get a deal with you on something, let's say I'm trying to, you're selling your car. I'm trying to buy your car. And I said, Dimitri, I'm in the business for a car. I really want a car. I need you to sell me that car. I'm going to break your knees. And you're like, dude, I'm selling the car. Why do you need to break my knees? I'm just saying, you're a very nice person, but I'm going to break your knees if you don't sell me the car. And I'll give you $2 for your car. And it's like, okay, dude, come on. Right? Like, meaning I'm asking for something that I know you're not going to give. And I continuously ask for the same thing over and over and over again. And I don't know what is in Trump's mind. I am aware of what is in the mind of the sociopaths that are around Trump. There is an article that came out by Politico pointing out that MAGA, who some of them may be true believers, don't want war, whereas the neocons and the lunatics that Donald Trump has effectively surrounded himself with have lumped together and started pressuring Trump in a lobbying campaign to try to get him to effectively bomb Iran and to not take it off the table. Whereas I guess others in MAGA are like, dude, you said you were trying to end wars, not start wars. What the hell are you doing? With Trump, didn't sit. Now, the most interesting thing in the world to me is what is in Trump's mind. Oh, that is so interesting to me. Because I agree with everything that you just said, that there is a continuity of all these presidents. Iran is the last man standing. Donald Trump is surrounded by neocons and whack jobs. And they obviously want the U.S. to fight a war on behalf of Israel, even if it takes Israel to start it, where they can say, well, we did everything we could. We tried to negotiate. They wouldn't allow us to negotiate. But they have policy papers, Which Path to Persia, that points out exactly what we're seeing them do right now. But just because they're policy papers, everybody knows that Donald Trump doesn't read. So Donald Trump may not know those policy papers exist. And so in his mind is the thing of what matters. Does the president know and is on board for these plans to attack Iran? Or is the president being maneuvered because he doesn't know anything about the world and he's being told, sir, we're going to get them to accept the deal. We're going to get them to accept the deal. And Trump believes this is a good deal. We're going to get them to accept it. They're going to accept it. And then it's going to be shocked as all hell when in 2 or 3 weeks, he's still banging his head on the pavement when Iran is like, no. And now he has boxed himself into a position of, I have to attack him, or I have to not accept what I said I was never, I have to accept what I never said I was going to accept. That is that is very possible to be true.
Mhm.
What do you think on this? Like, and I know it is impossible for you to get into Trump's mind on this, but I can't believe that the president will be left holding the bag for what this is going to turn out to be, which is an utter and complete catastrophe.
Yeah.
It would destroy his administration.
You remind me of this horror movie that Jennifer Lopez once starred in, and where she was like this psychiatrist and found a method of getting into the mind of a psychopath, and it was she was on.
Cell. Was it called Cell?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly. And
Yeah.
this horrifying journey through the mind of a psychopath. Frankly, I don't know that I want to get inside of Donald Trump's head, but
on that question, Lord knows I do, because it would solve so much for me.
Yeah.
Because I don't.
I agree with
you-
you. I'm joking, of course. I agree. I totally agree with you. So look, but at the end of the day, we can't, and so we have to go on the basis of the external evidence. It's all we
That's
can
fair.
do. The man. You said he's surrounded by neocon whack jobs. Of course, I agree with you. But I would say that the reason why he's in the position is because he himself is also a neocon whack job.
Yeah.
And that's what his record tells us. That's exactly what it tells us. He ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the top general of Iran, in a foreign country with which the U.S. is supposed to be allied now, Iraq, but which in fact occupies and largely destroyed, and took out not only other Iranians but representatives of the Iraqi government. He did that. Okay, he pulled the United States out of the Obama-era nuclear deal, even though Iran was complying with the deal, and even though the nuclear enrichment threshold under that deal, 3.67%, is extremely low. It's technically speaking, as I understand it, it's a bit below the level of enrichment you need just to operate a peaceful civilian nuclear reactor, which is 5%. Okay, so even the IAEA recognized that Iran was complying with that deal. He pulled them out. He is the one who has repeatedly said something that he knows Iran will not accept. He's demanded it, which is no enrichment.
Yep.
Iran does have a right, as do all states, to peaceful enrichment of uranium. The enrichment of uranium for peaceful civilian purposes. So they're correct. They're totally correct to say as a sovereign nation, we have that right. Nothing under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty takes it away from us. And by the way, why the hell should we give that right up when you yourselves have nukes and the Israelis have nukes and you're enriching, your heart's content? So he knows all of this, and yet he keeps demanding that Iran, end all enrichment. And I could go on and on. There's the attacks, the devastating attacks on
Yemen.
Groups who are allied with Iran, the criminal attacks on the Yemenis, on Lebanon, on Syria, all with the assistance and sometimes the direct participation of the United States government. This happened under Trump. Okay, Trump was the first one who directly attacked in his first administration, directly attacked Syrian government forces. He's the one who occupied Syria, an ally of Iran, and was stealing their oil and stealing, occupying their precious agricultural land. I could go on and on, Jamarl.
He defended Idlib.
Yes, exactly. He's a neocon whack job. That's what his record tells us. And the rational assumption is that that man is going to finish off the last state standing in that state of seven, that collection of 7 states that, the neocons back in the 90s, early 2000s said they wanted to destroy. And by the way, and I think this is very, very important to understand, I don't think that really this is about Iran's nuclear program. The U.S. intelligence.
It's not. Oh, come on. It's not. It has nothing to do with it any more than it was with Iraq. I'm sorry.
Yeah. What this is about is they can't abide the fact that there is this large, influential state in West Asia refusing to be a vassal of the United States, and so they've decided they're going to destroy it, just like they destroyed Libya, just like they destroyed Syria, just like they're in the process of destroying Lebanon and largely destroyed Yemen, and Sudan. This is what they do. If they can't control a state in a region that they want to dominate, they just render it a complete failed state, a chaotic jungle of suffering for the indigenous peoples. And I think that's what their goal is with respect to Iran. They realize they can't overthrow its government. They can't replace it with a vassal. So they're just going to make it into a failed state. That's their goal. So they're not going to try to penetrate, a half a mile down into the mountain. And by the way, if they accomplish that, that would be extraordinarily dangerous from an environmental perspective, something that the West doesn't talk about. But I don't think they believe they can accomplish that. This is just about making Iran into a failed state.
The only thing I would quibble with what you said is I think the U.S. is going to run into a buzzsaw.
Oh yeah.
I think they, man, I think they are going to run into a buzzsaw. I think Israel is going to run into a buzzsaw. I don't think, if you read like the New York Times, the stuff that they say is out of whack with reality. They're like, well, Israel was able to entirely destroy Iran's air defense. Really? They were? Really? And it's like, why do you think that? Like, what gives you what gives you that assessment that that's what took place? I watched those videos. You can see Israel's weapons getting knocked out the sky. And so it's like they run with these false assessments. Russia is Nigeria with snow. They're just a gas station masquerading as a country. Certainly we can knock them over. Okay, fast forward 3-4 years later, and what's happened? The entire context of the world has changed. If we remember, Iran was isolated. It is no longer isolated. Russia's made agreements and friends all around the world, and it has beat the living hell out of all of NATO with weapons productions, outstripping NATO 3-1. They got it wrong. And I'm saying, even with the trade war, they got it wrong. They weren't able to pacify the world with that trade war. Trump was begging other nations to help it gang up on China because the U.S. couldn't do it on its own. And I think the same thing and something similar is going to happen with Iran, where they think to themselves, the capabilities of Iran, I don't think they are fully capable of assessing in honest terms. I think they're assessing it in ideological terms. This is not an isolated nation anymore. They're not this country that doesn't have defenses. I think they could potentially destroy all of these American bases. They can knock out boats out of the ground. I don't even think we fully understand the capability of how far those missiles can fly. I could be wrong on this.
Oh, Jamal, I agree with all that. Like you and I are on the same page here, man. I do not at all think they're going to be able to pull this off. If they could pull it off, we should all be, hotly opposed to it. What right do they have to destroy a country like Iran? They have zero right. That's a criminal thing to do. To destroy any country is a criminal thing to do. But I don't think they're going to be able to pull it off. And the region will go up in flames, and this will be potentially the death blow to Western hegemony in that part of the world.
Honestly, this sounds horrible, but part of me, I'm not going to say it. It's just
I know, by the way, what you're going to say, and I'm not going to say it either.
Part of me is like, I want them to blow that shit out the sky. I want them to destroy. Like, I've gotten far harder in the way that I've seen this stuff, and it's like I feel like there needs to be consequences, and I don't know who else meets out those consequences, short of you bit off more than you could chew. What NATO and what Ukraine is experiencing now, just perdition. You kept poking that bear. You didn't believe the stove was hot. And now you're realizing, oh my God, the stove is hot. And the US, who said we'll be with you for as long as it takes, is now like, we're calling this a day for the time being. We're not going to give any more support. You can buy weapons from, meaning, yeah.
Listen, there are a lot of people out there in this world today, including in the West, who are feeling what you and I are feeling, which is we hate war. We don't want war.
No.
But man, the only way we're going to bring this horror show to an end is for Israel and the United States to be dealt a devastating military defeat in West Asia by the resistance in West Asia. There's no indication that, the U.S. and other Western governments are going to use their economic and political power to stop the genocide. Right. And, there's nothing wrong with having this feeling like if that's what it takes to stop the genocide, we don't want it to happen, but what alternative is there?
It just feels crappy. It just feels crappy because it's effectively saying another country being attacked and responding with overwhelming retaliation to that. It just feels crappy. Colonel Wilkerson pointed out, he says the U.S. will be militarily defeated if we attack Iran. Even Douglas McGregor points us out, we will be militarily defeated. He said this is not the military from the 1980s. These guys are running around with an ideological point of view that is nowhere near based on reality. And they are going to run into a buzzsaw if they indeed try to make that strike. Because it's not like, what are they going to do? Put 1 million troops on the ground? Where? Where are your airfields going to be? Like, all of these things are logistical issues. And so you're just talking about airstrikes, air power. Okay. Okay. We'll see. Right. Mm-hmm. I agree with everything you said. I think that's what they're gearing up for. And I think all of this other stuff is just public relations, where the U.S. can distance itself from what Israel does, but will come to its aid when it needs aid. Hell, it may even say, well, Israel blackmailed us, so we had to get involved. Who knows? Who knows? Dimitri, man, I always enjoy these conversations. You are fantastic. Let me give the audience a heads up of where you are, if I can find it. There we are. Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Dimitri ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. He runs the show Reason to Resist. Check him out on YouTube. He has a fantastic show. Today is just a portion of how awesome he is. Dimitri, we have over 3,500 people today.
That's great. It's a pleasure to speak to your audience, and I wish everybody well. Thank you.
Well, I'm only telling you that not as a boast. I'm saying it because they're there for you. Like, meaning this, I don't get 3,500 on it every day. They came, they stayed, they listened. It was like, hey, we like what's being heard. I guess my point is check Dimitri out. He's awesome. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Peace out. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we have a damn good crowd today. Shout out to everybody. We're at 3,700. I would like to point out this is the highest that I've ever been on the channel. This is the highest that I've ever had on any of the channels, whether it was on Fault Lines on this one. So I thank all of you for being here. You can always support the content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, buy me a coffee, all of those things. And thank all of you for being here. I have one chat before I continue. I made a promise to one of my audience members who was pretty cantankerous one day of waiting to the very end. And if I had a break, I was going to go through it. John Hendrick Clark, right here. John Hendrick Clark told us about money changers that ruined the relationship the Moors had with Spain for centuries prior to oligarchs. The Moors think is interesting. What, black folks from Africa coming into Spain, taking over for, I forget how long, eventually it falls apart at some point. And your point is effectively the banks, people who are dealing with money, was the reason that effectively fell apart. Alex Krainer gave one of the best succinct explanations of that I've ever heard. And, it's one of those things where, there's some people who are ideologues who go into countries to do it. And there's some people who are motivated by something else. And his point is, regardless of what is in the heads of the various people who are going into it, in a political system like the United States, where 90% of the side that wins is the side who's given the most cash. Okay, think about that. You get $1 billion, $1.5 billion to run your political campaign in the United States. Who's giving you that money? And what are you doing for that money? And does that elicit control over the candidate who got that money? And if the moneyed interests that candidate is going with, let's pretend for the moment that you have demographics of black, white, gay, straight, whatever, and they may vote in a certain dynamic. Does the rich vote in a similar dynamic? Meaning, yeah, you may have a group of people who are different. They may be black, white, gay, straight, etc. But the one thing that they have in common is that they're all rich, that they're all are in the stock market, that they make money by the expansion of the money supply and expansion of business of the various countries and everything else. And if indeed that is true, which it is, especially in a country like the United States, where there's a direct translation from here is money, and I'm going to get something in return for that money, or you're not getting that money the next time around, and I will give it to your political opponent who will do what I want him to do, even if it's not entirely direct. It's direct enough for me to get what I need out of this at the expense of the American public. And so, yeah, Iran needs freedom. Iraq needs freedom and justice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where we are making excuses for these wars. Well, we have to attack Russia, right? We have to knock over the government of Ukraine. This is geopolitical expansion. And in the words of Krainer's point is, but the reason they're doing that is because ultimately, if you think of the amount of resources Russia has at its disposal, the economics of the wealth, the West did have economic wealth. And they fully believe that finance capital would make the difference in the war, that it can destroy Russia economically because of the finance capital that they had at their disposal, missing the fact that you can't eat dollars. Your car doesn't run on dollars, it runs on oil. The dollar is a symbolic representation for achieving that oil or getting that oil, but it's not the oil. It's not the grain. It's not the fertilizer. It's not the numerous other resources that Russia has at its disposal. And other countries need those things in order to operate. And so, yes, you have a lot of money, but you can't eat your money. You can't put it into your gas tank. You can't put it on your wheat and grain. You can't do any of those things with that. It's symbolic. My point is, you want that stuff. And Europe is willing to basically risk on some level, make a wager. We will put hundreds of billions of dollars into this wager with the notion that our proxy can knock over the Russian government. Or we can put enough pressure on the Russian government where it collapses. We can get our hands on resources by having a compliant leader like Yeltsin into power once again. And it's a bad bet. It's not Nigeria with snow. It's not a gas station masquerading as a country. It is a country with a proud tradition that has gone back for thousands and thousands of years, whereas the U.S. is a flash in the pan currently in the way that it operates. And if you can ignore that proud tradition of a country that has been there for thousands of years, you can ignore the military might that it's had over those thousands of years, especially under somebody like Stalin, who had turned it into this kind of military bunker. But I'm saying you ignore that at your own peril purely through ideological lenses. My feeling is Iran, and again, it's a feeling because I don't know what Iran has under the dress or under the burqa. Well, they don't wear burqas. You get my point. My feeling is that in the same way that us attacking Russia changed the political context or geopolitical context of the world, basically changed the axis of the world. Because in real terms, you had a military organization that has spent 50, 60 years gearing up for war against the Soviet Union, and then what was the beating heart of the Soviet Union, Russia. And it wasn't able to accomplish its objectives. So what does that look like in real terms? Where with all the financial might at your disposal, all of this economic might that can be put into military might, even with the backing of the United States dumping in weapon system after weapon system, trying to get rid of the main exporter or resource that it exports. You do all of this, and you do all of it for years. And not only do they not fall, they excel economically, moving up in the rankings in regards to their economy. One of the fastest currencies on the rise, apparently the ruble, over the course of 2024. And they stomp a mud hole in your proxy while one arm tied behind its back. And the arm that's tied behind its back is coming from around its back and it's turning into a whip hand. And you're losing. And you have no capacity to change the context of the battlefield. You lost economically and you lost militarily. And the US, who's supposed to be the global superpower and hegemon, can only stand there with his thumb in his ass, not being able to do anything about changing the context of the world. You made a wager of power. Power, like I said, is a shadow on the wall, Game of Thrones, right? And people respond to what they think power is. But what happens when that power needs to be actualized? And you actualize that power, and it's not what you thought it was. It can't do what you thought it could do. And the world sees it, and the world changes as a result. The relationships that Russia, China, the BRICS nations have been making. And you get the global South seemingly being one of the fastest things moving, whereas the West seems to be decaying, especially Europe, with the US with $36 trillion in debt, not far behind it. It is a wild and fundamental change to our global order. And whereas I don't think the US entirely sees it yet, I don't even think Europe entirely sees it. I do think the countries that are the opponents see it and are being very competent in the way that they're trying to maneuver for it to get to whatever that new world and that different world is. You can test Iran, but you've had your canaries in the coal mine with the trade war with China and with this war in Ukraine, both of which you were not able to do what you thought you could do. If you're going to go after Iran, that is going to be a catastrophe. Heed my advice. I don't think Donald Trump is watching this channel. I'm just trying to point out reality as reality presents itself and has presented itself, as opposed to this American point of view that shapes the way we look at the world, where it's not looking at the world the way it is. It's almost looking at it with a certain amount of hopium in the way that we want it to be, with ourselves being just emancipatory, awesome, and everybody else being either vassals or enemies that needs to be controlled, what they're supposed to listen to. That's not the world. That's not the world. So we'll see what they end up doing. Hopefully, from my mouth to God's ears, that is not what they do. Because look, ideologues don't care. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump is going to be left holding the bag, not the ideologues. Lindsey Grahams of the world are not president. The Tom Cottons of the world, these other creatures that are backing, that are pushing Donald Trump to go forward with some kind of war, some kind of military strike, they are not going to be holding the bag. So they could be loud as they want. Hey, we should bomb Iran. Because fundamentally, they're not going to have the responsibility after the fact when it goes to shit. Trump is going to be standing there and looking stupid, holding the bag for what is going to be an utter and complete disaster. It will be a catastrophe. And you're not going to get their nuclear sites. Hell, Iran may even produce a nuclear bomb as a direct result of you doing that strike. You're not going to be able to decapitate. I don't care what the fuck Scott Ritter says. The notion that the U.S. is going to use an unprovoked nuclear war on Iran seems outrageous to me. I don't buy the premise. A bombing strike, maybe. Missile strikes, maybe. But that's not going to give you your bang for the buck. And they will respond. They will respond. All of those troops are fair game. Israel is fair game. What does Iran look like when it stops holding back? Because from their point of view, it's an existential challenge to the integrity of the state. And I would imagine they have a dead hand trigger also. Even if you hit the leadership, the missiles will fly. Trump better beware of the people that he hired around him. And again, Dimitri may be right. It doesn't matter what's in Trump's mind. I think it does matter. Because, yes, I've been very skeptical of this process. I've said it for several months now. There's a glimmer of non-cynicism in me. A glimmer of it. It's like a little crystal. It just stays there with the crystalline structure that tries to keep it intact. And I don't want that structure to break. And that little bit of crystalline structure in me says, you can't want to hold the bag for this. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't care. But do you really want to hold that bag? Do you really want to tank the global economy in a war that is unclear the consequences of? It's one thing for you to bomb Yemen. It's sadistic, it's immoral, it's unethical, it's sociopathic. But there is not a huge concern of your people dying en masse in that attack. You fully believe that you can roll the dice and for all intents and purposes, extricate yourself from it while killing people and killing civilians without your people dying in the process. You fully believe it as almost as a flat fact. And so that's fair game. You can do that. The murder of Soleimani, same thing, right? You believe that you can murder him and that the response is not going to be an attack per se. They may, but you're wagering that they won't. So again, you would do that. These are things that may not provoke wars in real terms. Now, you didn't have a stomach to keep that going with Yemen because you didn't want to be humiliated with them hitting and knocking out your missile carrier or your aircraft carrier, or for that matter, knocking the F-35 out the sky. Fair enough. But I think we should take note that the U.S. had no capacity to decimate Yemen in the way that they wanted to, where they could go after the leadership with murder campaigns in the way that Israel is going with a murder campaign in Gaza, Lebanon, or Syria. And if you couldn't do that to Yemen, how do you expect to do it to Iran? Now, it is possible that the president, yes, there are people around him that wants this war. Israel wants this war, meaning everybody that is surrounding Trump wants that war. And that's something in Trump, maybe instinctual, is like, this looks bad if it happens. That instinct may not matter. And I gotta be honest, I don't think it does. I think at the end of the day, even if I say that is true, which I don't know if that's true, I think Trump has boxed himself in. His rhetoric, he's allowed the people around him to incentivize him to make statements. I'm going to bomb them. 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 They better get rid of it or I'm going to bomb them. And then they tell you to F off. And the people around you have told you that this is a good deal. They'll take this deal. And then they don't take your deal. So you've stated openly that you're going to bomb a country. And you believed the people around you telling you that, hey, this is a good deal. You can accept this deal. And they don't accept it. What do? You're stuck. You're boxed in. You boxed yourself in. And so regardless of what is in his mind, I don't think it really matters. I do think he's going to end up in some kind of military strikes against Iran, whatever those look like. It may be Israel being the attack dog with the U.S. saying, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. Or the U.S. may join in because, let's be honest, I don't think Iran is all that much worried about Israel. I think it's more so worried about the U.S. And for the over 20 years, it has been building up its capability to deal with the U.S., not Israel. Meaning, if you have the capability of dealing with the U.S., then a country of 8 million people don't matter. Israel couldn't even prosecute this genocide without the U.S. Iran's capability is directed towards fighting the United States. And they've spent 20 years or more preparing for this very fight. They're not giving up their sovereignty for the U.S. And if it takes some kind of military campaign for them to demonstrate it in the way that Russia... Look, Ted, give me 1 second. When the Soviet Union fell, you got all of these people screaming that it's the end of history. And you got Western states that strongly believe that the reason why the West acted the way that they did was because from their point of view, you're a part of a failed state. We don't have to respect you. We don't have to listen to you. You can be out here screaming for security guarantees all you want. We don't have to give you anything in this process. You're part of a failed state. We are the West. We are fantastic. We got the United States backing us, so we don't have to listen. And what did Putin do? He took his respect at the barrel of a gun, shooting one Nazi in the face after the next, after the next, after the next, until it got to the point of, oh my God, we're terrified of the Russian military with 1 million men who've been killing and dying and has decimated our forces and is outproducing us 3-1, if not more, at this point, and have reached the pinnacle of a new form of warfare over the course of this last 3 years. We have to respect them. We have to deal with them on these terms because we have no military that could go against that military, meaning they had to take their respect to the barrel of a gun. It's unfortunate that they had to do that, but they were pushed into a corner where there was no other choice for them to do so. Will we make the same mistake with Iran, where we keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and they end up taking their respect at the barrel of a missile in this case? God knows, I hope not. But that's what it seems like we're headed for. Let me go to my guests. I am joined with the man himself, Ted Rall. Ted Rall is political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host of TMI with the great, the one and only, the beautiful, the fantastic. There are not enough adjectives I can add to this, Manila Chan. Also with John Kiriakou, another fantastic guest. And that one is, I'm trying to remember these things off the top of my head. What is the one with John Kiriakou? Deprogram. Thank you. Deprogram. Check out both of those. Both of those are fantastic shows. Do both play Monday through Friday?
No. TMI with Manila is Monday through Friday, 10 Eastern. Deprogram is Wednesdays at 5 in the afternoon, so there's going to be 1 at 5 this afternoon, Eastern, and 12 noon Saturday. Obviously, it's a finicky schedule. We'll have to even it out.
It's okay. No worries.
Yeah.
Ted, we have nearly 4,000 people here today. We have nearly 4,000 people here today. I've never had a number this high. I'm not telling you that as a brag. I promise you I'm not. I'm more surprised by it myself, which is why I'm shocked to see it. But I'm also telling you that this is a good showing. And the audience at 10 a.m. when the show's over with, check out Ted Rall. The man is fantastic. And I brought him on the show because he's fantastic.
Thank you, Jamal.
Your historical knowledge is astonishing. And I've always been impressed by it. Ted has a book coming out called, what is it called? What's Left?
What's Left.
What's Left. When does that come out? Just so the audience would know.
It's out. You can buy
Excellent. That's right. I gave it a review on Amazon. Mm-hmm. You gave me an advance copy. I was able to read through it. Fantastic book. The Democrats are in the wilderness. They have no clue what to do. Radical transparency doesn't seem to be on the menu. So
no,
they're just going to be where they are. No. One of the parts I want to point out to this is on the issue of immigration. If I asked you, what do you think the point of view of Democrats who are immigrants are, or let's say people in this country who are immigrants are, which party do you think they favor at this point? And just to give you a heads up, Democrats had a 32-point lead in 2020. What do you think it is now, if you had to guess?
Oh, I think. Well, I mean, I know the answer is that they favor Republicans at this point, and that's a huge reversal, as you point out. I mean, it is shocking, but the Democratic, if I mean, I can
Real quick, Ted, I want the audience to get into this as like a game show. Audience,
Go ahead.
tell me what you think the number is right now.
Oh.
I want the audience to tell me, because this is a shocking number.
I bet
It was
Republicans
32.
way ahead
Well, it was
of Democrats.
plus 32 in 2020. It is moving to the Republican sphere. You're right. But audience, tell me, what do you think
Let's
the
say
number?
plus 25 GOP.
Okay, you think it's plus 25. All right, audience, what do you think it is for GOP? And I'm going to show this right now. This is CNN talking about the immigration. By the way, this is during protests on issues of immigration, by the way.
Start off on the fact that immigrant citizens, immigrant voters, foreign-born voters have gone tremendously to the right on this issue in 2024 and 2025 versus where they were in 2020. Closest to a trust war in immigration. You go back to 2020. Democrats get this, held a 32-point lead on this issue. Immigrant voters were in the Democratic camp. Jump forward to 2024, 2025. Look at that shift, a 40-point shift.
Ted, that's a 40-point shift. How the hell does that happen?
Well, it happens when you deliberately leave the border open, right? I mean, I honestly don't understand. I'm as left as they come. I think I don't understand what what the basis was for Biden's policy back into 2021. I'd be curious. We have a Tapper book that gives us the behind the scenes workings of the senility and decline of President Biden, but we still don't have a behind the scenes policy book of the Biden administration. Like, why did they do this? Why did they not do that? And at some point, I mean, I don't know if it was tied into the pandemic or if it was just a reaction to Trump's kids in cages or what, but they basically left the southern border completely open, and it's not like it was even passive. They created an app to facilitate this, right? Like literally, like, come on over and make an appointment on the app, and then present yourself at Eagle Pass, Texas, or wherever. Line up, which people did dutifully, and they were admitted into the U.S. Basically, the word went out, the borders open, the Americans are letting everyone in, and they did. And the thing is, so that's bizarre, because there was no real understanding of why that happened, but also there was no communication to the American people that ever sort of said, oh, by the way, so this is why we're doing this. We have we don't have enough employees to do unskilled labor. We need more. We have a population problem. Our consumer economy risks shrinking because of a low birth rate. Something. They just did it. There was no communicating whatsoever, no messaging. No. So even people like us who are news obsessed couldn't really tell you, even if we're trying to, like, at gunpoint, to save our lives, if we were trying to say, why did the Biden administration open the border? We literally just don't know. And
I just assumed it was reflexive. I just assumed Trump is an old girl on the border. He spent 4 years bashing immigrants. And so when Joe Biden got in, there was political pressure on him to not be Trump. And so I have to get rid of Trump's border policies, even if some are working. I have to, get rid of whatever, in which case all of these kids are coming over where parents will bring their kids to the border. Meaning it's almost like they took Joe Biden as a softer, cuddlier president because Trump left. And because of the political pressure that was on Joe Biden from his own political party, for example, just to give an example, like right now, we have this taking place in New York. We know about the riots in California. I'm going to assume for the moment that let's say that this is not inspired by something more subversive. These people are Democrats for the most part, or at the very least, people who feel some kind of way about immigration, whether they're maneuvered or otherwise. These are the people who are out here. This is New York.
And I can't see if they've been successful.
Not just New York. This one is taking place, I believe, in Chicago. Look at all those people.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another one. This one is taking place. This is another one in Chicago. Fighting cops. Yes. Oh, I hate it when it does this. Hate it when it does this. Right. Then you have another one in Atlanta. Like, meaning these have been taking place all over the United States, and they seem to be spreading. And there are like 1,000, if not 1,400 more that are planned. Democrats, this is what they think on this issue. It's like, so that's the pressure that's on Joe Biden. At least that was my take. Give me your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I have a different take on the protests. I
Please.
think that the
I will step
protests
into it.
here, I think, if we look at the polls, it's really super interesting. Most Americans, this is obviously more Republicans than Democrats overwhelmingly, they want the border closed. They think people who are here illegally ought to be deported.
Yes.
But when you go into the raids and the hows, people don't like it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, there's everything comes down to execution, right? So if you say, like, I mean, I'd be the first to say, years before Donald Trump ever thought about running for president, I was writing columns saying that we ought to have a wall on the southern border, that we ought to protect American jobs. I'm an economic nationalist. I think we should be looking out for American citizens first. That's
Agreed.
the job of any U.S. government, left or right,
Agreed.
ought to be doing that. So I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, you're not a country if you don't have a border. That's what
It's a
defines
leftist
country.
position.
You take a patch of land. You're like, this is my land, and then
Yep.
I decide who comes and goes, right? That's what a country is. And so, like, the idea of open borders makes no sense at all, and most Americans aren't in favor of it. But
Agreed.
the execution of these deportations is so violent and cruel and degrading and disrespectful of human dignity that
Agreed.
it's causing a lot of people, in the middle to be like, these are not all open border people, to say, fuck you. You
Yes.
can't do that to my friend, my neighbor. And let's not also forget, like, these people, most of them who came in illegally, it's like, okay, they came in illegally. They violated a law that the country itself didn't enforce. Okay. So it's sort of like if suddenly, in New York where the speed limit's 55, and, if you drive 60, you will never get a ticket. Okay. You
Right.
have to drive at least 70 to maybe get a ticket. It's like, let's just say they start becoming assholes about the 55 mile an hour speed limit. People will say, okay, that's fair. The speed limit's 55, but don't be assholes about it. Like, phase it in.
Don't snatch me out of my car and tase me
Yeah.
for driving 55, right?
Exactly. Give people a warning. Give
Yeah.
people a lot of warning tickets. Have lots of signs, messaging. Explain why speed kills, and it's about saving lives. And then you're going to be able to get buy-in. Okay. I mean, like, in France, the speed limit is the speed limit. You go 1 mile an hour, 1 kilometer over you'll get a ticket. So, but the point is, same thing here. Imagine a scenario where the government just said, listen, sorry, but, like, we let you in, we know, but we shouldn't have, and now we're changing the policy, but we're going to give you $25,000 if you agree to leave the country. We're going to give you 6 months notice so you can, like, wrap up your affairs. If you have a house, you can sell your house, get that money. We're not going to disrupt your life too much. And we're going to give you some money so you can get started when you go back home, which is a tiny amount of money considering what we spend on, like, Ukraine and Israel. It's nothing. And we just said, okay, so, we're sorry, we shouldn't have really let you in. And that's how and let's say you're not dragging people off the street. If you're really worried that they're going to vanish, maybe you slap an ankle bracelet on them, a monitoring bracelet, and you say, okay, we'll see you in 6 months. Don't make us come and get you. Fine. I think you wouldn't see these protests. But they've been kidnapping people off the streets. They've been dragging, moms away from their screaming children in the streets. They're government thugs. They're terrorists.
Yes.
They're goons. They're wearing masks. In many cases, we don't even really know that they work for the government, or much less are members of ICE. Who the fuck are these people? And I'm still waiting for a Second Amendment solution to this, because there will be. And when it goes through the courts, that person will walk, because if someone tries to kidnap you and you don't know who they are and they refuse to identify themselves, you are allowed to use deadly force to defend yourself. So that the point is that this is about the how. That's what these protests are about. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some people who are out there who are in favor of open borders and they don't believe in immigration laws, all that. But I think the reason that this movement is now a growing movement, the first major rebellion since BLM, is because of that. It's because there's a lot of pent up frustration about the way this is being handled. And by the way, when we see like the images that you're showing now of the guy on the burning on the damaged Waymo taxi, that's like, again, it's pent up frustration. Americans don't like self-driving cars. That's a different talk.
It's like fuck that self-driving car.
When they get a chance to kill them, they do. So
all right. So two things. I agree with everything you just said, kind of, because I think I made this point yesterday. I was like, if you ask the American people, should you get rid of people who are committing crimes that are illegal aliens, they would say yes.
Sure.
They would agree. They would have no compunction. You might get like 60, 70% in the poll. Should you go after people who have committed no crimes, who paid taxes for the last 10 years, and who just so happen to overstay their visa? Oh, you're not going to get that yes.
No, you're not.
And to your point, it is
and
the
by the way,
goon.
what was Ellis Island? Ellis Island was just the same, right? No, not one person had a visa to come to the United States who went through Ellis Island. Not one. They all showed up just like the French expression, like a hair on your soup. They just showed up, and the country was like, you don't have to be good enough. We need you to work.
Yeah, and two, the other part that you make is, for me, why this is happening. You have goons going into a courtroom and snatching the guy as he walks out the courtroom.
Who, by the way, is following the law by showing up to court and to his
yes. You have Trump deporting people to foreign countries that they don't even belong to.
Right.
You have these goons showing up in neighborhoods out of the blue, not even necessarily marked, and snatching people. And you get a lot of people who come around who say, what the hell are you doing? And then they're going to get aggressive because you have no markings on, so nobody knows who the hell that you are. Like, that shit is outrageous. And Trump has been sending his thugs to do this all across the United States. And so it's like, it's not shocking that you get a reaction from that. It's outrageous. Add in liberals who just hate Trump, who thinks it's outrageous also, meaning they may be dicey on the border thing because they were okay with Biden and Obama deporting like 4 million each. But they don't like the way you're doing it, as you point out, and they don't like Trump. So that's kind of a trifecta or a double of both.
Also, there's an emotional component, JT. I mean, everybody knows illegal aliens. I mean, everybody does. Everybody, there are brothers. There are friends. There are colleagues. I mean, I know some.
Husband and wives.
All races and creeds. It's like we just know them. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like when, gay rights was taking off and everyone started to realize, wait, you're gay? I didn't know you were gay.
Yeah.
it's like everybody knew gay people.
I guess
as a parenthetical, I think that's kind of the problem with the trans movement right now is not that many people know trans people because there aren't as many. I think it's more complicated. But it is more complicated. But I'm just saying that's like but part of it is, if the percentage of trans people were as high as the percentage of, say, undocumented workers, you would, it's different. It's emotional. Yeah. It's like, and it's kind of like every person I've ever known who was undocumented, and this is probably true of everybody who's listening, they weren't fucking around. They weren't gang members. They kept their heads low. They stayed out of trouble. Where I used to live in an area in the Hamptons where there were tons and tons of them. You could always tell who they were because for some reason they all had Illinois driver's license plates because Illinois kind of doesn't really check to see if you're documented.
Really? I didn't know that.
But they all drove too slow, right? It's like they
didn't want to bring the cops
hit the
on
stop sign hard and waited and always used their turn signal. They always drove too slow. And I was like, oh, undocumented worker. That's how they are. They're like really trying to follow the letter of the law and keep their noses clean.
I think the
These are
problem,
people that you want to beat up and like brutalize? Really?
well, Trump is racist. There's that.
Right.
Two, there's a component of this that seems to be used for political expedience. Kind of like the way, they say, okay, we're going to take migrants and send them to New York, right? Okay, well, you're using them as a political cudgel. It's almost like you're using them as a political prop. They're human beings, but you use them as a prop. It's an effective prop for what it was doing, especially with Adams in office saying, oh my God, this is outrageous. But you're effectively using them as a prop. And so you're now sending killers, the Marines, people who are trained to kill, to go and do crowd control, which is outrageous. I mean, like, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to nationalize the National Guard. Okay, I think California is a massive state. They could handle their own, but whatever. But to say, okay, we're also going to send trained killers there to police Americans. And it's like, whoa, that's pretty astonishing. What justifies that? Nothing justifies that.
No.
And now you have these protests springing up all across the United States. I'll tell you what Colonel Wilkerson said. He said he thinks this is a prelude to a takeover of America, that Trump effectively doesn't want to leave. He thinks on some level that this, and I don't want to speak for him, but that all of these people are not who they said they are. Like, for example, who's paying for this guy to have that massive flag? And where did he get that massive flag from out the blue like that? And is it shocking that there were color revolutions taking place in Ukraine, that something similar may be taking place in the US? Do you believe that? And let me get your take on that.
It's not impossible, right? I mean, look, I certainly think like the odds of that scenario, that this is about the government, Trump teeing up a possible declaration of a state of emergency with a view towards establishing martial law, suspending elections, and remaining in power. Is what are the odds of that? Well, the odds are not zero, right?
Yeah.
They ought to be, but they're not zero. And so, are they 50% or better? Probably not. But, I mean, somewhere around 20%, I'd say, which is
take it on the flip side.
Than it
also,
ought to be, and Trump knows, by the way, when he leaves power, he's like Netanyahu, becomes re-exposed to some criminal prosecutions, right? He's cool right now. He's in the get out of jail free card as long as he lives at 1600. But that all comes to an end, in a few years. So he's got to be thinking about that. In terms of the Mexican flags and stuff, I mean, I have some LA connections, right? I was the cartoonist at the LA Times. I did talk radio out there at KFI Radio in LA for years.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time in LA and in the LA area. And so I've seen these Mexican flags before. And it's a very, like when Angelenos rebel, there were even Mexican flags during the 1992 Rodney King uprising.
Were there?
There were. I mean, basically.
See, Ted, this is why I love you on the show, man, because I would have never known that. And you just know it.
It's sort of a generic sign of leftism, primarily Chicano, like from the 1960s activism. So basically, like in the Southland, right? If you're Hispanic, basically everyone just assumes you're under the umbrella of Mexican. Like all Latinos are like conflated. And
Mexicans.
So at a certain point, Latinos started to embrace that and sort of, take the piss on it and be like, okay, yeah, we're all Mexicans. Like, what kind of Mexican are you? Oh, I'm a Venezuelan Mexican. I'm a Colombian Mexican. Well, I'm a Puerto Rican Mexican. And so it became sort of like a thing at protests. And, Mexican flags are easy to buy right by the Mexican border, right? So
I see.
So it's a local politics thing. I mean, the politics of these people are not really particularly concerned about the national optics. They should be. They're continuing a tradition of rebellion that really goes back to Zapata and stuff like that. So so it's really about leftism in general. Even like whites and blacks and other people who like rebel in Southern California, sometimes you'll see them at a protest with a Mexican flag. So it's like that's what it is, and I mean it's fodder for Fox News, but it's
that's not shocking. Is your point? That's normal for LA.
It's it's like look, I was telling my friend Scott Stantis this yesterday. I mean, I would love personally as a leftist, I would love all our protesters to look like the civil rights marchers with their skinny ties and thin
Yes.
lapels, and and in their Sunday best dresses with the
Yes.
beautifully hand lettered signs that say
I
"I
am
am
a
a man."
man. Yep.
They're gorgeous, and it's impossible for the biggest racist piece of shit white person to look at that and say these are bad people,
Yep.
right? And so, like, when our protesters are scruffy and sweaty and young and pierced and tattooed, and like, so it might be harder for quote unquote middle America to relate to them, but the point is, as Rumsfeld would say, you go to the protest with the protesters you have. I mean,
Not the ones you want.
uprising. I mean, rebellion is rebellion, and I'll take it in any
Yeah.
form. But I mean, I guess the point is the explanation is needed. I don't know what good it does, but it's like, it's like, but if you're seeking to wonder what the fuck they're thinking, this is what the fuck they're thinking.
That's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
The other question goes to the other side of it. Okay, let's say this is not being pushed by Trump. Are the leftist groups paying for this? I mean,
I sincerely doubt that. Let me put it this way, like in significant amounts. I mean, there's
well, real
probably
quick, I'm just pointing out there are several events. There are over, Jesus Christ, this is like thousands of political events planned on June 14th alone.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody planning for this? They're just doing it spontaneously?
Yeah, I mean, seriously, I'm seeing them pop up on my Facebook. There's all sorts of progressive and leftist groups who, they're seeing what's going on. Like just yesterday here in New York, we had our first major protest about this issue. And, I was privy, I saw all the, I was CC'd on all of the, planning materials and stuff. I saw that stuff. I'm not part of the planning group or anything, but the point is I'm on these mailing lists. And it's like, you could see it was organic. It's real. These are groups that are around, and they, this is the spaces they occupy, and they're like, this is happening, and we need to stand up in our community. It's kind of funny that it took so long in New York, because here's where, we had our New Yorkers dragged off the streets by ICE, very close to where I live right now in Manhattan at Columbia University, and so it's taken a while. Things often originate in California, cultural trends. And so,
and just kind of spread through the country.
Yeah.
I guess, what is it? I accept the protests, right? I agree with you that I kind of wish that these guys were wearing suits, holding a sign and saying, I mean, I'm a man, because that was kind of the point. Like, but as I was telling somebody else, King and his protesters went through classes in order to not respond when they were getting beat by cops.
Yep.
To be peaceful, to take the punches and to take the beatings, because that was kind of the point. You're putting your body on the line so people can see, look at how bad they are. Look at what we are doing. We're not doing anything but, peaceful protests, and they're responding in this way. When I see them breaking windows, going into Nike shops or Adidas shops, breaking through a sushi restaurant. For fuck's sake, why are you breaking into a sushi restaurant? That looks bad. And my main issue with it is that when Donald Trump is sending in the National Guard and stuff like that, does the public ultimately side with him on it, saying this is chaos, and this is chaos for an issue that we ultimately agree with him on, because they may not know chapter and verse of the goon squad that he's been sending all around the country to do this?
Basically, people have to, look, I agree with you. It's bad optics. I mean, in an ideal scenario, you'd have an organized left-wing cadre who is in charge of these protests. And at the first sign of looting, for example, they would stop the looting, using violence if need be to stop it. And that discipline, I think about like in the Chinese Civil War that culminated in the communist victory in 1949, the communist army was extremely disciplined. And when the army would go through, all armies live off the land, and they would end up like eating the farmers' food and their animals. Then when the nationalists would roll through, they'd rape all the local women and steal all the food and be on their way. It was like like locusts going through. But when the communists came through, Mao was very strict about this. you would give an IOU to a farmer for any food that you confiscated. And
Yeah.
then even later on, if that army lost control of that territory, they would send a runner in secretly to make good on the payment to the farmer after
Interesting.
the fact. Now the word went out among the farmers, like, you wouldn't believe what happened. I mean, this guy, he came back, like, the communists lost this district, but they came back and paid me. They'll be like, no way. And that kind of thing, that discipline, really builds up popular support among the masses who are fence sitters. And so I agree with you. That's what we would want. This is a conversation that could have taken place under Richard Nixon, right? Where Richard Nixon
That's right.
raged in favor of the silent majority. This is Trump, like, grew up during Nixon. I mean, he and I both, like, know we draw from this, and he's playing out of the Nixon playbook. Like, this is sending in the Guard, sending in the troops. Let's beat up the dirty hippies. Put in some, restore some discipline. And so, what's the political aftermath?
Right there. That's what I'm curious.
Is that basically you end up with nothing settled. Half the country thinks that that the state is fascist and is trying to crack down on people who are just trying to make the world a better place. The other half of the country thinks that the cities and minorities and foreigners and the hippies are out of control and deserve everything they get. And there's no and then even after the uprisings are over and, like, the Vietnam War ended and the protests ended, everyone went back to their homes, but nobody ever agreed on what any of it meant. And so it keeps the same discussion keeps popping up.
So you think it's just a draw ultimately? Like, when this finishes out,
it's like
peters out to a draw.
It's like the Civil War. The Southerners really never agreed that they should have lost. They lost, but they're kind of like, they're surly about it. It's not like the Germans. The Germans know they lost and think it was good that they lost. That's different. Then society can move on. But
KJ, give me 1 second. Okay. If this is a draw, Trump is only month 4?
Yeah.
He's not changing policy.
No,
I mean, it looks like a standoff.
It's gonna get worse. I mean, look, people are gonna get shot. When you send soldiers in, just think about it. I mean, if you and I together, right? We're in the National Guard. We're sent to LA. We're wearing heavy body armor. It's 85 degrees, on the street with, like, the sun reflecting off the asphalt. You may not have really been hydrated enough. I'm not really kidding. And there you are, and there's, like, nasty people yelling insults at you, making fun of you, like, throwing shit at you. You and I might be self-disciplined enough to keep our cool.
I'm not.
But like, there's 1,000 of us, one of us isn't. And someone's gonna shoot someone. Like, fuck you, I'm armed, I don't have to put up with you. That's what's going to happen, and then all of their
hell breaks loose.
are going to open fire too. There will be, protesters will be killed. I mean, this will happen. It's an inevitable result of sending, the military to deal with a civilian situation, which, by the way, is illegal under the Posse Comitatus.
That's what I thought. Okay, so I'm not insane on this. I kept saying, military is not supposed to be on U.S. soil. That's not their jobs.
No. Yeah, this is a literally a crossing the Rubicon moment. Literally, the military was not supposed to enter Rome. That's exactly what's happening here. Look, he can invoke the Insurrection Act.
But this is not an insurrection.
But you'd have to declare it. Yeah, the thing is, I said January 6th wasn't an insurrection. Because if it had succeeded, it would not have overthrown the federal government. If this succeeds, let's just say the whole city of Los Angeles is declared an independent republic. It's still not trying to overthrow the federal government. So, like, the point is that, like, it's not an insurrection. It's like, but he could argue it, and it would work through obviously the ACLU would go to court, and all these other groups would go to court. But it would, the courts are slow. That's what Trump's big superpower in his second term. The system is slow. I'm fast. That's his superpower.
Ted Rall, fantastic, Ted. You're always great.
Thank
That's
you.
I mean, because I think that's the conversation, right? Like he's just started his term, and you have all of these protests as a direct result. Let's say that there's nothing else behind it other than organic protests, and it's not like he's stopping.
He's going to shoot some cute girl. It's going to be on TV, and that's when things are going to start to turn ugly, and people are going to a lot of his people will turn against him the way they turned against Richard Nixon.
You think so?
Yeah,
MAGA.
the optics. Yeah, it'll just be like you went too far.
I don't know. MAGA seems to be cultish, but maybe.
Yeah, it's like they say, right? Like the boxing thing. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Punched in the face.
Everyone has a plan until CNN is constantly on loop, showing some beautiful 22-year-old girl, her face blown off by a National Guardsman for no good reason.
That Trump sent in, or worse, even a Marine.
Good luck with your messaging now.
Ted Rall, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host of TMI Morning Show. It comes on at 10 a.m. immediately after this. Also deprogrammed with John Kiriakou at various hours. I'll go with that. He also has a book out, What's Left. Definitely check him out. Ted Rall, he's fantastic. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, Jamal. Talk to you soon.
You have a good one, man. Be safe.
All right, you too. Bye.
All right. I would like to bring on my next guest, the man himself of the hour, KJ No. KJ No is journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He is a contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. He is also part of the Breakthrough News Network with the show The China Report. KJ, when is the next show for The China Report, just so the audience will know?
It just came out yesterday with Ben Norton and Megan Russell from Code Pink. She's my co-host for that episode. And we are discussing Pete Hegseth's crusade against China. I think it's really important news.
What do you call it? A crusade?
That's what he calls it, not us. He calls it a crusade.
Dig into it for me. I mean, I know he gave that harebrained speech at Taiwan. At Shangri-La. Actually, 30 minutes for me in Malaysia. 30 minutes for me in Malaysia, gave that harebrained speech. Okay, why does he call it a crusade? I mean, I know they want to pivot to the Pacific. I know that every president going back to Obama, if not further, wanted to pivot to the Pacific, and they kept getting bogged down in war after war after war. This one being the Ukraine war. Why does he call it a crusade? Is it because he's willing to go to war with China over Taiwan? Like, what is his? Step into this for me.
It comes out of a book that he's written, but essentially it boils down to the fact that he is a very, very firm believer in Christianity. He's a Christian fundamentalist, if you will, and he believes that there is this kind of religious mission that they have to go to war against China and also defeat Islam, etc. It is a very, very religious ideology, and that's what makes it so dangerous. We've discussed this before, that there are sectors of the administration that are very, very religious, and Pete Hegseth is one of these people. Now, what also is worrying is that 4 months ago at his confirmation hearing, he didn't even know where the Southeast Asia was. And, he named Japan and Korea as Southeast Asian nations. And now, as we've said before, we're in the process of doing remedial education for the Secretary of Defense by escalating to war. So these are the kind of dangerous trends that we're seeing right now at the highest levels of government, not to mention, the domestic issues.
But he'd lose. That's what I keep coming back to. Look, if I'm getting in a fight, I want to win. There is such thing as a noble loss, but it's usually with an overwhelming opponent that you're trying to make a point, and your loss or the sacrifice. Like if Martin Luther King goes across the bridge and gets beaten by cops, okay, he's sacrificing himself for a larger objective. I get that part. That's not this. This is a hegemon that is not willing to transition elegantly into a new world let's say, a multipolar world, and is continuously provoking a fight that he just can't win. If you go to nukes, you lose. Everybody loses. Even with this notion of tactical nukes, you lose. And also, one last point. There is nothing in the Bible that I've seen that says go forth and to fight China. Like, how has this become a religious mission that he's on some kind of messianic objective?
Well, there actually are. I mean, certainly it doesn't say in the Bible anything like that. And besides, the Bible is highly open to interpretation, but it's a lot of analogical thinking. It's this apocalyptic good and evil mindset, which informs people like Adrian Zentz and Mike Pompeo and many, many other people in very high-ranking positions of power. And once they have disowned their kind, I'm sorry to get psychological on you, but
No, go for it.
what happens is they kind of disown the parts of themselves that they don't want to acknowledge, project that onto the other, and then all of a sudden we have the demon, the devils that we have to destroy. It's really a lack of understanding of one's own psychology. I mean, it goes all the way back earlier, but at the very least to Martin Luther, who used to see demons everywhere. He would complain that he would see demons throwing, arrows and spears at him all the time, and that his job was to vanquish demons. And this strong Protestant mindset of having to, vanquish demons and destroy any evil entities. This is why we end up with witch hunts and crusades. And that mindset, just comes all the way down to the modern era. And you can see very much how strongly informed by this kind of Christian ideology of, good and evil. This is something I think that is unexplored, but very, very real for high-ranking, high-powered members of the ruling class. Regarding your point about we would lose, I mean, I hate to keep repeating myself like a broken record, but this is the grizzly bear fallacy. People believe
They think they can win. Yeah.
they can beat a grizzly bear with their bare hands. There are diagrams on how to do this. It's a meme. Is the Secretary of Defense somebody like this? It's possible. I can't speak for his own kind of subjective assessments, but the person that we really need to look at is Elbridge Colby. Elbridge Colby is the Undersecretary for Policy for the Department of Defense. So really, really important position. And his belief is that we have to go to war against China. And if you look at his public statements, 2015, his testimony before the Senate Arms Committee, his articles in Foreign Affairs, his writings in the Center for New American Security, you can see that he believes that the solution is the use of tactical nuclear weapons. He's saying that we have to be very deliberate about this, but this is a kind of, this has to be part of our, toolkit. It's like, you send out the emergency responders, you have to give them, this toolkit, and nukes are one of them. So he's deeply, deeply wedded to the idea of waging not only war, but nuclear war against China.
Does China have a dead hand built into their system?
I'm sure they do. I'm absolutely sure they have something. They're not idiots. They know that the U.S. was planning to nuke them since the 1950s onwards, just for the heck of it. After the Sino-Soviet split, the U.S. had single integrated operation plans whereby if a nuclear war started with the Soviet Union, they would wipe out China just for the heck of it. Yeah, even when China and the Soviet Union were completely, split, there was a Sino-Soviet split. The mindset among the U.S. ruling class was, we'll get a twofer. We'll wipe out the Soviet Union and we'll also wipe out China to boot. Who cares that, they have nothing to do with us, or they're not waging war with us. It's just a 2-for-1.
But they do know that any attack on China is bringing Russia into the war. Like, meaning Russia and China at this point have somewhat of a relationship that's built on mutual security. It has to be. Part of the reason that the US wanted to wedge Russia away, even though it was comically absurd, is because they wanted to, at some point, isolate each entity so they can go after each one individually. Now, Russia's not that stupid, right? It's like, oh, yeah, sure. You've been attacking me for the last God knows how long, but I'm going to side with you against China. Sure. Good luck with that. But I guess my point is, if they do that against China, I have a hard time believing that Russia does not get involved, meaning it's just a world war at that point. Russia will attack. Or do you not think that's the case?
Well, Russia and China do not have a formal alliance,
It's not
but
formal.
clearly they're helping each other in important strategic ways. So I think there's no way that a war against China or vice versa can be considered in isolation. It's really
No.
the war of the empire against the global south, against the vassals. So it's the US plus, NATO and some vassals, Japan, Korea, and the Philippines against the rest of the world. And certainly the global south understands that they will hang together. If they don't resist together, then they will be wiped out. So that much is clear. The direct treaty alliance is that North Korea has a mutual defense treaty with China, and Russia has a mutual defense treaty
North
with
Korea.
and so there is a direct connection there. So yes, any type of war will be far greater and far more expansive, and it certainly will not be limited in the way that the U.S. and people like Elbridge Colby think it will. But once again, if you look at the discussions between Elbridge Colby and Lyle Goldstein is a professor at the U.S. Naval College, and he has been studying the war over Taiwan for decades. He's probably the most well-informed U.S. Expert on Taiwan. And he essentially tells Elbridge Colby, we don't have a chance. This war is ours to lose. It's a family quarrel. There is no reason for us to get involved. It poses no strategic challenge to the United States. So we need to butt out of this. It is we will get our asses handed to us. And this is true, and all the war games show this. And when he says this to Elbridge Colby, then Elbridge Colby drops his realist mask and says, well, once they get Taiwan, today Taiwan, tomorrow the rest of the world. Essentially, his viewpoint is an ideological one. It's a domino theory. And because of that, he wants to provoke war. And he calls it deter war, as does Peter Hegseth. But just replace the words deter, because anytime they use the word deter, they're actually meaning provoke. I mean, it makes you just do that, translation. You'll see it makes much, much more sense, because it doesn't make sense to think that by sending an armada of ships that you are deterring anything. You are provoking. You are, picking troubles. You are picking a fight. But once again, coming back to Taiwan, and I can't emphasize this enough, is part of China. It's part of China's sovereign territory. This is acknowledged by both China, by the United States, by the United Nations, by all the countries of the world, including Taiwan province itself. And so for Pete Hegseth or Elbridge Colby, but very recently, Pete Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth at the Shangri-La Convention, to warn China against exercising its sovereign rights inside its sovereign territory. And to say that, China's threat is imminent, and if my president tells me we are ready to go to war and win the war against China, these are fighting words. It's essentially a declaration of war to put the shoe on the other foot. What if, and right now we see this right now in Los Angeles, Trump has sent in National Guard troops to California. Now, the legal justification is not present as far as I can tell. It's not. But what if China said to the Trump administration, you better not send any troops to California. Otherwise, we will go to war against you. Those would be fighting words, right? But once again, shoe on the other foot. This is what the US is signaling to China. And so it's so extraordinarily not only dangerous, but hyper hypocritical.
The thing I hate about these conversations and arguments is that it's never about the thing that they say it's about. Right? Like Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Okay, no, they don't. They just don't. You just want to reshape the Middle East with American power, and you're looking for any justification to do so. Iran has nukes and trying to get nukes. No, they're not. You just want to take down Iran because it's the only thing standing in Israel that has any capability of preventing Israel's murderous, rapacious, vampiric thirst for blood in that region. And the same thing with Taiwan. You just want to find some way to put a hedge against China's expansion. That's all it is. Meaning these things are just excuses for them to do what they want to do anyway. The real reason you can't really sell, you can't go to the American public and says, hey, we want to stop China's expansion. We don't like the fact that they're becoming a superpower. We don't like the fact that our primacy is wearing down and we're a decaying empire and China is taking more of a primary role. We don't like that. So we need to do something about it. And so we need to go to war to prevent it. Okay, well, that doesn't sell, right? Nobody buys that can of applesauce from the store aisle. If you can say, well, we're there to defend Taiwan. We're there to prevent weapons of mass destruction. I don't even know why that sells, but okay. There's always a lie baked into it. And it's the lie that always kind of reveals the con that's in it, right? Taiwan is not a threat to us. This is not our issue. Why the hell are we this far, thousands of miles away, 28 hours from the United States, and sticking our nose into business? Even if Taiwan was independent, let's say it was independent, how's this our business? And yet here we are with Hegseth screaming at the height of his lungs that he is going to militarily defend Taiwan, something that is a part of China and recognized to be part of China even by the United States. That is astonishing. So I agree with you. It's always built on a false premise. This is about hegemony. That's all it is. It's not about anything else. The US is losing its primacy and we are freaking out about it. Ukraine is one example. Taiwan is another example with people who think they're too smart. Miliki said too clever by half or clever by half or something like that. They think they can sell this. I don't think they can sell this to the American public any more than I think they can sell a war in Iran to the American public. But maybe I'm wrong.
This is why the lies have to be so extreme.
Yeah.
This is why if you look at sectors of the American mainstream media or even Al Jazeera or Middle East Eye, they're doing yeoman's work in spreading U.S. propaganda. That tells you where Qatar is coming from, both Middle East Eye and Al Jazeera funded by Qatar, which is a monarchy. But they go, on a rampage, attacking China for its quote unquote human rights. Can you imagine this? A monarchy.
Yeah.
Criticizing, a people's republic, for its human rights. But essentially, they're trotting out, quote unquote, the genocide allegation again. This BS, bullshit, genocide allegation. China is genociding the Uyghur population. Pardon my French, bullshit.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah.
Can I just interrupt on that one second?
Please go
The
ahead.
fact that the Uyghurs are in Syria right now murdering Alawites justifies Chinese policy of trying to re-educate those whack jobs. Like, meaning, A, it's not a genocide, for one. B, many of that group has gone into Syria. And some of them are talking about going back to China and spreading terrorism once again in China, of course, in this case with the US blessing, because these whack jobs are going to be under one government. This government is under a US puppet at this point, and who the hell knows what that stuff is going to be exported. On some level, doesn't that justify China's response of saying, okay, these people are whack jobs. They've been radicalized, and we need to stop them from blowing stuff up in China. Give me your take on this, because you know this better than I do chapter and verse.
Well, certainly, the U.S. has been weaponizing Takfiri Islam, Wahhabi Islam, since the 1980s, if not really since the 1950s. They used radical Islam, which really is completely detached from Islam in its real ethics and viewpoint. They cultivated a very, very extreme form of Islam that they used to undermine all the socialist and nationalist liberation movements in the Middle East, in West Asia. These were the Ba'athist, the other movements of the time. They used these Islamic fundamentalists. And that then was transposed into Afghanistan in the 1980s. And then it was spread all over, the global South. For example, in the Philippines, So the U.S. has been weaponizing radical Islam, just as they weaponize fundamentalist Christianity inside the United States itself. And they've used it to turn it into a form of, terror that overthrows, undermines, and attacks governments. And so China was the next project in this agenda. And, prior to the kind of, large social programs that the Chinese had, they were having massive attacks in public places, train stations, scores of people just hacked to death, just incredibly brutal attacks, cars mowing down, scores of people. Now, this was happening on a pretty regular basis. And so that's why China decided that it was going to strengthen its, border control along that perimeter. And then what they did. And so this is what's interesting, because you have to contrast it with Europe, because the Chinese did. Because at core, they're Marxist, and they believe that discontent comes if material conditions are not good. So essentially what they did was they invested in Xinjiang. And so they increased, all the social programs, increased the infrastructure, and made the place really quite, a prosperous, moderately prosperous area where almost everybody is doing well. You can see that, 300 million people visited Xinjiang last year. No way you could have a genocide with 300 million tourists visiting. The counter example to that is Gaza. Yeah. How many people are allowed to get into Gaza? Just think. There's that stark contrast. We know what genocide looks like. We know what looks, feels, smells, tastes like. It is so concrete and in your face. And they have not been able to produce a single body of anything, of anybody who has been genocided in Xinjiang. In fact, the Uyghurs were exempted from the one-child policy. The highest ranks of, the Chinese Politburo, Xi Jinping has one child and one child only, because nobody is exempted. Nobody was exempted from the one-child policy, even their highest cadres, except for the ethnic minority. So the Uyghurs were having 3, 4, 5 children That is not, if
That's
that's
a hell of a genocide. That's a hell of a genocide.
opposite, life expectancy has doubled. Birth rates are far in excess, or were far in excess of the majority. And I mean, just one more data point. The Chinese in China, the ethnic minorities are 8%, a little above 8% of the population.
Okay.
And they own 45% of the territory. They're 45% of the territory in autonomous regions. That's a statistic you will not find in any settler colonial state. How much land does do the indigenous First Nations in the U.S. possess? It's a fraction, and all those places, almost none, and all those places are devastated, sacrifice zones. So it's completely absurd. But you are going to hear one of the things is that in order to manufacture consent for war, you lie, right? And there is this kind of brazenness in the U.S. Foreign Policy Administration, which believes that the more absurd the lie is, the more people are willing to believe it. Okay, how does that work? It's like a poker game. If I make a huge bet, it kind of, you think, oh my God, there's so much at stake here. The other person must have a good hand. It's the same thing. The U.S. makes this extravagant, exorbitant, ridiculous claim, and people think, wow, there must be some strong evidence. Otherwise, they would not make such, a ridiculous claim. But of course, that's not the case. They don't have anything. It's simply this idea that, the farther we are away from truth, the closer we are to war. And essentially, those who tell you absurdities are preparing you for atrocities. This is what's going on.
KJ, I can't say I doubt you in this. I've seen what my government does. It's one thing to do that to Iraq. It's one thing to do that to Yemen. It's one thing to do that to a country that you think you can win. This is not that. And I know you said the fight a bear fallacy, but Jesus Christ, it's so ludicrous. Like, it's not. I am not going to try to fight Mike Tyson. And I can lab on Mike Tyson all I want. I can say Mike Tyson, grab my ass. I can say whatever I want. I'm not trying to fight Mike Tyson. And because I think he's going to half kill me. Me making it out alive will be a success, right? Broken eye and everything else. I'm saying that this is not a war that we have any chance of winning. It doesn't matter if you lie to your populations. The rest of the world is probably not going to believe you. They've seen the mendaciousness that comes out of the US. So I guess what I'm getting at is you may be able to pull this scam once of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You can pull that scam once. It is very hard to pull that scam twice. And you're pulling that scam on a population that, the population targeting is not going to believe you. 50, if not more % of the globe is not going to believe you. You may get those idiots in Europe, and you may get some people in the US, but even I would wager a portion of the US is not going to believe you. So it seems like a fool's errand. Whatever they're writing in those policy papers, this stuff is getting dumber and dumber over the course of time. Like Brzezinski, at the very least, he accomplished his objective. These goofballs, not so much. I could be wrong, but they seem to be losing IQ points the more desperate they get to hold on to primacy, and they don't get it.
The first thing is, the ruling class is always high on its own supply. It tells these lies, and then it forgets that they are lies, or purposely unremembers them, and then it believes these lies itself. And there is one persistent and consistent source of U.S. power, and that is its media, PR, advertising, propaganda apparatus.
Agreed.
It is so powerful. It's the one quote unquote contribution that the US has made to, quote unquote global culture is its capacity to indoctrinate people. It's so extreme that people don't even believe that they're indoctrinated. It's that line
That's true.
from Baudelaire. Baudelaire says, sorry to get religious here, but Baudelaire said the devil's greatest accomplishment was to make people believe that he didn't exist. I mean, the U.S. propaganda's greatest accomplishment is to make people think they're not being propagandized, that they're not being manipulated, they're not being jerked around. Let me just give you one quick example.
Please.
Right now, there are riots going on, protests and riots going on in Los Angeles. Okay.
Not just like LA, New York, Atlanta, Chicago.
All over, right? And people are protesting, these brutal deportation policies of President Trump, as they rightly should. The piece that you don't see or don't hear about is Barack Obama deported a lot more people than Donald Trump.
So did Joe Biden.
Exactly. So did Biden, right? For every 2 people Trump deported in his first administration, Obama and Biden deported 3. Now the question is, where were those protests during the Biden and Obama administrations? You didn't see them. Okay, and this shows you the power of this media apparatus, the way it directs and makes people act in very, very specific ways, even when they think they're acting from their own initiative. This is not to say that, my point is that they should have been out there in the streets demonstrating during the Biden and Obama administrations, but they did not. Finally, we're seeing some resistance, but this is the problem, is that people are so indoctrinated and so guided, and they don't realize that they're being guided and manipulated. The issue around immigration, it boils down to this. The US has always wanted, needed, used, and exploited cheap labor or disenfranchised labor. And the category of quote unquote illegal immigrant, when did that start?
Oh, I don't know.
1962. It started, well, sorry, not 1862. It started with the end of slavery. Okay, when slavery
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Absolutely. So when slavery ended, you remember U.S. wealth was built on
slaves,
on slavery. And when that slavery ended, it needed another source of exploitable, disenfranchised labor. And so they started to create this category of illegal immigrants. And so then they got another century of, cheap and disenfranchised labor, along with, of course, there was also the continuation of slavery inside the prison industrial system. And also, remember, this was also when vagrancy laws were passed so that anybody, especially Black people, could be arrested, put into prison, and then their slavery would continue. So the U.S. has this long history of using, quote unquote, immigrants as a force to both discipline organized labor, undermine organized labor, as well as extract super profits from this hyper exploitation of people without any rights. And it goes back and forth on how many people it wants in this labor force. And so, you'll have people kicked out and then brought back in, and kicked out, brought back in. It's a sluice gate. They open and close it at will. And in the meantime, the humanity and the suffering of those people is completely ignored. But without looking at this deeper picture and just getting outraged over the kind of incident du jour, misunderstands fundamentally the system. So yes, better late than never, but understand that this is not simply about a single administration or a single individual. It goes much deeper than that.
I think the issue, I don't think America has an issue with deportations, if I'm being bluntly honest with you. Because as you pointed out, Obama and Joe Biden was far more effective at doing so, even though Joe Biden had an open border for the most part. I think the issue is the way he's doing it. Like, I've seen them in the first Trump administration, there would be parents who were going to school to pick up their kids, and they would deport those parents. They would catch them and deport them, and the kid was just staying at school, not knowing where the parents were. There were times where Donald Trump would go to give a speech, and they would deport people en masse, like let's say hundreds of people that were at a factory, all at once, as he was going into the place to give the speech. Again, parents, relatives, nobody even knew what these people were. And as grotesque as that was, it's only gotten worse. I mean, he's deporting people into countries that my point is, he is so grotesque in the way that he is doing it, that it is almost like kicking a beehive. Whereas Obama could play basketball, he could sing Al Green, and he was very smooth when he needed to be. And so it was less grotesque in the way that Obama did it. Like, meaning,
And it was better covered up. It was
better optics associated with it.
Let me give you an example. During the first Trump administration, people were aghast that there were these buses filled with baby seats for separating babies from deported parents, right? Okay. Now, what most people don't understand is that those baby buses were commissioned under Obama, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just that we didn't see the pictures until the Trump administration, and then it became, a scandal. So,
and they blamed it on Trump, by the way. It was like, oh my God, look at these kids in cages. And it's like, that was during Obama's term also.
Yeah. So, I'm saying, better late than never, of course. Yeah. And of course, if capital is allowed to flow through borders, then humans should be allowed to do so as well. Otherwise, you're creating this kind of osmotic barrier that simply concentrates wealth in one direction. Right?
Oh, see, I don't know if I agree with that. Look, I do think countries should have borders. And as you pointed out, they were using illegal immigrants or illegal labor to cut down wages, to drop it. Like, this was one way for the oligarchs to effectively go after labor, every bit as much as I want to ship this job to another country.
I agree with you, Jamal, but what I'm trying to say is not that countries shouldn't have borders. I'm saying that if borders are porous to capital, then to compensate that, you need to have borders porous to labor, because capital is just objectified labor. It's just labor that has been codified.
Liquefied. Yeah. Yeah, it's like this symbolic representation of labor in this kind of weird, interesting, philosophical way.
The capacity to control and command labor, that's what capital is. And so capital is the capacity. It's dead labor that has the capacity to control or command living labor. And if you have that moving in one direction only, then it should be allowed to move in the other direction.
Dead labor. That's an interesting way to look at it. I always just looked at it as, like, at the end of the day, humanity, and I'm going to let you go after this, humanity is stuck with a philosophical issue. Who does the work? Like, babies need food. Okay, who's going to get that? Who's going to harvest the grain? Who's going to do those things? People get old at a certain point. Those people can't necessarily continue to do it. And so if those people are not just going to die, then somebody has to do it. If you make machines, you have to have somebody to run the machines. And so you get this kind of weird allegory for labor. It's almost like a symbolic representation of labor. I guess you can call it dead labor. I guess it's saying the same thing. I just had never heard it in those terms, dead labor. I guess you're right. I just always looked at it as a symbolic representation of labor. But you're right. Just dead labor just sounds so brutal. But yeah, that's fair.
Well, I mean, it's a system in which the dead control the living, right?
Yeah.
People who are dead inside control people who are struggling for life and justice. And also where dead labor, in the sense that it's labor, it's work that has been done, that has been codified and encoded and enclosed in machinery and institutions. Like, if you look at a building, that is labor that was done in the past, right? If you look at a machine, that was labor that's done in the past. If you look at an AI, if you look at an AI program, That is labor that was done in the past. And that computer also did labor, but that is also built by humans. So in a sense, it's labor that's done in the past that has been ossified and enclosed and codified and objectified into machines and institutions and the instruments of capital. And then those machines start to control living human beings. It's a classical Marxist formulation. I'm not breaking any new ground here. But I think the important thing, that you point out is that there is a problem of labor. And traditionally, it's been solved by people helping and supporting each other, right? So human beings are the most interdependent species on the planet. When a child is born, for at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, it is not capable of fending for itself. It's not like, the snake that slithers off and is independent by itself. Towards the end of your life, you are going to need constant care and support. And throughout your life, through many, many periods, in major periods, everybody will go through periods of life when they need to support, when they need help and support. Now, if you look at the fossil record, you can see that human beings that were injured survived those injuries. How did they survive? This is, tens of thousands of years old. You look at that fossil record, you see that human beings had serious injuries, fractures, breaks, etc. All of those things, those people, we can see that those survived those things. How did they survive? Because they had a community that was taking care of one another. And this is how we survive. This is how we became human, by taking care of each other, by cooperating, by supporting each other, and there's a term for this. People refer to it as ancestral communism. But the fact boils down to is nobody needs to be taught how to become a communist, because at core, at the heart of it, we are all built, designed, evolved towards supporting each other. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't even, be able to get past, the first day of birth, right?
But that's a cultural argument too. Like oh God, what is the guy's name? He's an economist, and he makes this argument that part of the reason that, let's say, certain governments trend towards either communist or socialist governments versus some that trend towards, let's say, this kind of capitalistic or uber capitalist system has to do with the family structure. That family structures, or countries that have family structures that were more brought people together, that believed in working together, that those governments were created by those families, where the family unit was, let's say, the beginning structure of those governments, and the governments in some level resembled the family units that were created. So there was an interdependency that was understood, where there was, let's say, maybe a leader, the dad. You had family members that were together. If anything happened, they pulled themselves together. Whereas, let's say in Europe, let's say in England, in the United States, when you're 18, you're supposed to leave. You're supposed to make your own way. You're supposed to figure this shit out, which gives you a government that kind of functions in a very similar way as the family unit itself. There's less notion of authority. So they may not accept the family's authority in the sense because they're going to make their own way in regards to having their own family structures. Like they're making a point of saying, because of the way the families culturally have come together in the West, or the way they function in the West, you have a government that effectively is resembling that. I don't want to say broken family structure, because it's not exactly broken, but it kind of is in the way that we operate. Whereas, let's say in Russia and China, maybe in like Indonesia, and some of these countries, it was far more. We're a family, we're a unit, we stick together, we work together, and the community itself resemble a family. I cannot think of that guy's name. It was a fascinating breakdown. KJS kept you for too long.
I mean, it's a pretty common argument, Jamal, and I'm going to stay a little longer just to respond to it.
Yes.
But this is the core ideology or the mythology of capitalist systems. Margaret Thatcher put it well. She said it very clearly. She said there is no alternative. Tina, okay, there's no alternative to
Of
capitalism.
course, they would want to make that argument, right? This is all theirs. This is the end of history. The Fukuyamas. Yeah.
Right. And she also said there is no such thing as society. There are only individuals. Okay. No such
That's
thing as society.
insane.
It
That's
is,
unhinged.
right? But this is what people are indoctrinated to believe, that they're just individuals. And I've said this before. This is the ideology of the predator. The predator wants the prey to think of themselves as individuals so that they're scattered and they can be picked off and taken down and exploited and eaten and killed, etc. This is what a predator-prey relationship needs in terms of its ideology. But go back, and sorry, to get into the books, but if you go back and read Karl Marx, there's a text called the Grundrisse, which is the groundworks or the basis for Capital. And the first part, he talks about Robinson Crusoe. Why is he talking about Robinson Crusoe? Okay. There's a really important reason for that, because prior to Robinson Crusoe, we understood that human beings were deeply, deeply interconnected, deeply, dependent and supportive of one another. And what you needed a new ideology that asserted that human beings could exist by themselves in the wild without any other support, and were self-sufficient and strong and powerful and independent. That ideology we see this marked out in this kind of very profound and epoch-making way in the book Robinson Crusoe, where this guy, lands on an island. He's completely self-sufficient. And then he grows up and he becomes big, powerful, and wealthy. Well, you have to look at the details, because how is he self-sufficient? Because this is all the stuff that he got from the ship, right? He didn't actually make himself self-sufficient in this kind of survivalist myth. He was not a survivalist. He was just an accountant who counted the number of stuff that he got off this ship that had been wrecked. And then when he decides that he wants human company. And the reason why he wants human company is because he wants a slave. He writes in his journal, I need some company, I need a slave. And then all of a sudden a slave appears, Man Friday, who he, enslaves and then later sells. And even the ship itself, where he got all these, things that allow him to quote unquote survive, this ship was actually a slaver. It was a slave ship.
Was it?
Exactly, right. And later, Robinson Crusoe becomes wealthy because of his slave investments.
That's not self-sufficient.
That's not
That is you
self-sufficient.
using human beings for your own ends. It's very capitalistic. I'll give them that, but that's not self-sufficient.
But that's where the ideology you see that ideology being built out, starting that period. And there's even a form of literature which enforces that. This is called a novel. And the novel, it starts around 15th, 16th, 17th century. But Robinson Crusoe is one of the key books that establishes this form of experience of this literary genre, which is focused on the individual. And it's the belief that the individual is self-sufficient, that they have no ancestry, they have no family, they're all foundlings or orphans, and they just go through their life self-sufficient and powerful and efficacious, and they become rich, wealthy, or notorious at the very least. This is deliberately built into that. And it's called a novel because not only is this a novel form of literature, but it's a novel experience, because prior to that, people were always telling stories that were interconnected. There were stories of communities, there were myths, there were romances, but they were telling the stories of collectives. And the novel comes forth as the story of this individual, which is necessary. It's the foundational ideology of capitalism. So all of this is to say, economists can argue whatever they want, but they're arguing mythology, not science, not logic, not math. They're arguing mythology. And you can trace, the genealogy of these mythologies back to their origins. And it's all propaganda. And this is why I say the US and the West and the capitalist West is really, its greatest accomplishments are in propagandizing people, mystifying truth, rather than building wealth and blah, 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 whatever you have.
KJ, you are awesome. Donald Trump is trying to tell people that we won the war, World War II, which is funny to me, right? It's just, I'm waiting for somebody to say, Mr. President, you realize that 80% of the Germans that died in that war died on the Eastern Front. Nobody has said that to him yet. I am waiting for somebody to say it. He's like, you be speaking German now, or maybe Japanese. Okay. KJ, you are awesome, man. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. And the audience loves you. We have 4,400 people here. This is my largest crowd. I thank you for being a part of it. I honestly do.
Thank you.
KJ,
Always a pleasure. And fight the propaganda.
We try. Damn, Lord knows, man. I try. I try. KJ Noah is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's a contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is available at iacenter.org. He is also on Breakthrough News Network on the China Report. They just released a video out yesterday, so definitely go check them out. Breakthrough News is a fantastic network, and KJ, if he's on it, it's going to be a fantastic show. Thank you for this, man. You have a safe day. Be safe.
Thank you.
All right. We've come to the end. We've come to the end. And we have kept the audience the entire way through, which is very rare. This is a historic show. I've never had 4,400 people here in one show. I don't even know why we have that many people here. But welcome aboard to the Thomas Show. I thank you for being here. Let me read. Yeah, hit the like button. Hit the like button. You can always support this content. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, etc. And I thank you all for being here. I hope you enjoyed the show. And I hope you guys are willing to come back. Run 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. I'm sorry, I'm dragging ass a little bit. 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. I am here unless something catastrophic is taking place, in which case I will be on the next day. Tomorrow we have Patrick Henningsen has just confirmed. He is another fantastic guest. Arno is a great guest. Sarah Bills, she's with DD Geopolitics. Great guest. I need to get better at corralling that energy. When I talk to her, I feel like I'm talking to somebody like a buddy as opposed to doing an interview, which always have us going off the rails as opposed to having a very straightforward thing. She is awesome, by the way. She would be a great guest. So Arno, he is going to talk about what's taking place in regards to those strikes in Kiev. They have been lighting Kiev up day after day after day. And what is taking place in Russia in regards to, I guess, the plan going forward, whether the special military operation is changing. Patrick Henningsen, he's going to be here. He is a fantastic guest. He is horse. What I mean by horse, I don't mean, I just mean he is a very strong guest. He drives a lot of views. People love him, and he's very intense when he's talking about stuff. He's very good. And Sarah Bills, she's fantastic. Easy to talk to, fun to talk to. I always enjoy talking to her. I need to limit my time with her because I always keep her over, but she's going to be great. I hope you guys join me tomorrow for another damn good show. Let me read the chats before I call this a day. This is Hung Me Out. That is the funniest and dirtiest name on the show. Can you get Carl Ja for an interview with KJ? No. Oh, you mean bring both of them together? Maybe that'll work. Maybe. Christopher Nude. So look, when I bring on guests like that, the energy should match. And so like when I bring on Colonel Wilkerson and Master Sergeant Fritz, their energies dovetail very well together. So I know it's going to match. It's going to work well. KJ and Shah are very different in their presentation and how they function. Both are very good. Carl Ja is fucking hilarious. He knows the history of Asia extraordinarily well, so there's no shade on Ja. He is fantastic. KJ is more professorial. It's an odd combination to me, but I don't know, maybe I'll think about it. Christopher Newton, Trump is probably playing with Iran because it's an existential issue for Israel, and he wants to provide existential solutions for Israel to steal the Zionists. What? For Israel to steal the Zionists and the RNC from Netanyahu. that is a 12-dimensional chess game that I don't know if Donald Trump's intelligence can keep intact. The reason why I make this argument, or the reason why there's a crystalline raindrop amount of non-cynicism in me on this, is because I actually do think he's incompetent. And so it's one thing if you're dealing with somebody who reads the policy papers, who has a formed ideology. Biden had a formed ideology in what he wanted to accomplish. He may have been weekend at Bernie's. He might have been 20 seconds from death, but he knows I need to take down Russia. He knows that. If he doesn't know anything else, he knows that. He has a well-defined ideological point of view that he wants to manifest in reality. It's suicidal, but that's where he is. I don't know if that's Trump. And because I don't know if that's Trump, then I'm left with a man who knows little to nothing about the world, little to nothing about geography, little to nothing about the history and the context of this world in the context of that geography. And so what I'm left with is a man who has an instinctual idea of what he wants. And he is surrounded by vampires. That's what I'm left with. Now, does the man surrounded by vampires know that he's surrounded by vampires? In that sense, I think the answer is yes. Trust those vampires? Maybe. Wants to be left holding the bag for what would be an unmitigated catastrophe? I don't know that. Meaning, we can conjecture all day, but I've always told you if I knew something or if I thought I was fat, dead on about something, a point of view, I would tell you, this is what I think. It's not that I told you flat out. I fully believe I would sell my left testicle that Donald Trump knew exactly what was taking place with the bombing of those airplanes. Maybe not about the terrorist attacks, but he damn sure knew about those attacks in Russia during the time period. He can say, I didn't know anything about it all he wants. He can distance himself from Zelensky right now all he wants. I believe he knew about it. On this, it is very possible that Trump is trying to negotiate to avoid a larger war, and that his threats of bombings is for a desperation that he is feeling about not wanting to be left holding the bag when he is ultimately pushed into bombing Iran. That is not inconsistent with what we're seeing. I hope you get my point. Meaning, if you're coming up with a theory of the case, it is not inconsistent to say that his threats of bombing is with the idea that he fully believes that he can get something out of him because he doesn't know any better. And that in fully believing he can get something out of him, that he can threaten his way to some kind of deal, that he can threaten his way to weaken Iran, that he can accomplish his objective, not realizing that he can't. And that the people around him who are telling him, yes, Trump, this is a great idea. Yes, we can go with this. Yes, we can support this. Yes, we can back this. Yes, we believe that Iran will ultimately accept this because they don't want to be bombed. Those people are probably lying to Trump, knowing full well that Iran is not going to take it, knowing full well that the president is boxed in and is going to have to make an attack. The point that I'm trying to make here is it is very possible that Trump doesn't know what the fuck is happening in this situation, and that he's trusting people who have objectives that he himself may or may not be okay with and on board for, but is ultimately stuck with because of the position that he has effectively taken and the people that he hired, that he ultimately ended up trusting. I'm saying I don't know what is in his mind. And yes, I am super curious about what is in his mind. Yes, we can look at objective reality and say that ultimately he's going to be pushed into having to either shit or get off the pot. Meaning, you've said you're going to attack him because they're not going to make a deal with you. You're going to have to attack him. Or you're going to have to let Israel attack him and be like, oh my God, I can't believe Israel attacked. But we will help Israel out with full force if we need to. In which case, my hope is he gets militarily defeated. Both. I'm saying that yes, whatever in his mind may not matter. But I am super curious about what is in his mind. Because that tells you whether, when Arno was on the show, Andre was on the show. And Andre said when Zelensky first got elected, Zelensky actually did want a peace deal. He did want to bring the hostilities to a close. And somewhere along the way, he goes into a room, comes back out, and he's Warrior Zelensky. That change happened somewhere in the process. And Andre pointed out, he just got bought off. His priorities of being bought off mattered more than his other stuff. And people came and made promises to him that they ultimately couldn't keep because the Russians beat the shit out of him and every other country in Europe under NATO. I'm saying that it is very possible that what is in his mind is, I don't want a war. What happens is he still gets the war because he can't, or the very least won't, get rid of the neocons and say, I'm not doing this. I'm going to accept what they give me, and I'm going to run and pretend it's a win. And if Israel attacks, to leave them to their own devices. Could he do it? Yes. Will he do it? No. I get it. It's fool's errand trying to figure out what's in Trump's mind, but it's my own pet curiosity. KJ is on another level. KJ is fantastic, ain't he? KJ is awesome. KJ is awesome. Wanda, USA, John Henrik Clark told us about the money changers that ruined the relationship the Moors had with Spain for centuries prior. Oligarchs indeed. All right, guys, it is late. You got an hour and 36 minutes today. I'm sorry, 3 hours, 36 minutes today. I want to give a shout out to all of the people who are here. Bill Burr is hilarious. Bit of an asshole, but hilarious asshole. Jeffrey Sachs would be a great guest. I would love for Jeffrey Sachs to come on the channel. Could never get in contact with him. Never get in contact with him. Let's see. Mystic City. What's on Trump's mind? Shlomo sausage. See, I always say plaque, brain plaque. Fei Lu. Nick Riviere is passionate about China. You should be thankful. Oh, I am passionate about China. You should be thankful. Fei Lu, don't let anybody diminish your passion on any particular issue. Shout out to you. James H. Meox Phi, I think that is. Jalopy, Gary Trait, reborn through hate. Jesus. Cypher Agent, Adrian Dittman, Frank Friel, Navy Vet, Alexandria Black. Thank all of you for joining me. Thank all of you. I'm going to end this. You guys have a fantastic day. I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 172. Signing off. Have a good one, all. Be safe.